sa spade Latahan na ay naiwadali na hinted For sa kanag naman Itanggashin siya Ikam hanuna for.
Chapter 14. 5 days later Aurnach found her there, just as he had each day, sitting by Caermon's bedside. Since the attack, she hadn't left his side. The same place, the same silent devotion. As if her vigil alone could keep him tethered to life. Liobhan's figure, bent over her brother's still body, was anything but fragile. She gently passed a damp cloth over his forehead, and her expression held a mix of focus, fear, and exhausted tenderness. Aurnach, standing still at the threshold, realized with icy clarity that he would kill for her again without hesitation. Fergus MacRae had deserved no less. Regardless of his bloodline, regardless of the consequences. A man who took pleasure in inflicting pain had no place in the world. He knew Clan MacRae would demand blood for the death of their youngest son. But none of that mattered now. Liobhan turned, as if sensing his presence. She hadn't heard him enter. A brief smile, dulled by fatigue, softened her features. "The swelling has gone down," she murmured, as though the relief were too fragile to voice aloud. "But he still only wakes for a few minutes at a time." Aurnach stepped up to the bed, and let his eyes settle on his brother's sleeping face. The bruises were less severe, but the blow to the head had been brutal. "It's best he sleeps. When he wakes, even breathing will hurt. But he's a MacInnes, and stubborn as a mule. He'll pull through." Liobhan let out a quiet laugh, her eyes still veiled by exhaustion. "He's not the only stubborn one under this roof." Aurnach gave her a crooked smile. He said nothing, but his hand found her shoulder and rested there for a few seconds. There was no excuse for touching her, and yet he did it, with the calm need of someone who's learned not to turn away from comfort. He felt the stiffness of fatigue in her muscles, the tension of someone who had watched over too long beyond her strength. But before anything else, they needed to talk. Liobhan, as if sensing it, straightened with a near-defiant posture. She gripped Caermon's hand tighter, as if she too needed to anchor herself with the gesture. The stubbornness in her eyes burned bright behind deep shadows of exhaustion. The protective instinct driving her was fierce. Aurnach drew a breath. "We need to talk. Urchenna will come relieve you soon. Caermon needs rest. And more than anyone, you need to step away from this room for a while." "I can't leave him," she said without looking at him. "Not yet. If he wakes and I'm not here." "Liobhan," he interrupted, his voice firmer, "that's enough. You can't do everything. We'll talk tonight. But now you're going to eat, bathe, and sleep. Or you'll get sick. And I won't allow that." She looked down at Caermon, her face shadowed by an inner struggle. Then she lifted her chin with that quiet dignity he was beginning to recognize. "As you wish, laird," she said with restrained irony. "I'll return to our chambers and do as you've ordered." Aurnach watched her leave, regal even in exhaustion. She gave Caermon one last touch and disappeared through the door without looking back. He allowed himself a brief, bitter smile. He was used to obedience, not intelligent defiance. But with Liobhan, everything was different. It had been from the start. He sat beside the bed, in the chair that still held the warmth of her body. He studied his brother's sleeping face. Despite the calm on the surface, he couldn't forget the brutality of that afternoon. The visible wounds were only part of it. Caermon had been beaten, and if Aurnach had arrived a few minutes later. He closed his eyes. The image returned vivid as a nightmare, Liobhan's skirts torn, face bruised, struggling to escape. A choked scream that still rang in his blood. If he'd been any later. He passed a cold cloth over Caermon's forehead, mimicking the gesture he'd seen her do so many times. The touch brought some calm. But not answers. Branneth had given him a brief report, full of gaps. No one had explained how they'd ended up outside the castle without an escort, violating a direct order. Caermon would have to answer once he woke. But first, Aurnach needed to hear from Liobhan. Not just the facts. Also what had gone unsaid. Despite the anger simmering beneath the surface, what he remembered most vividly was how Liobhan had clung to him in the midst of the slaughter. It had been instinctive, almost primal. As if something invisible bound them together. A fine thread, yes, but taut and vibrant. One tug could snap it. Or start to weave something new. Aurnach sighed. The thought was dangerous. His journey to Edinburgh had been long, longer than expected. And necessary. He had stood before the king, spoken with Ardmore, fulfilled his duty. The alliance with Elspeth MacLean was still on the table. Politically, it was his best option. But since he had seen Liobhan bleeding in the woods, with death brushing her lips, something had shifted inside him. It wasn't just desire. It was a longing that soaked down to his bones. He knew he was supposed to marry the MacLean. That was what was expected of him. But for the first time he dared to wonder, without words yet, if there might be another way to honor his clan, without betraying himself. Chapter 15. I am one who loved not wisely but too well. Othello Act 5 Scene 2. Shakespeare. Aurnach had spent the entire afternoon caught in a thought that wouldn't let him go, like an ember burning slow and steady beneath the ashes. Beside him, Liobhan's mere presence stirred a restlessness that wasn't new but was becoming harder to ignore. There was something about her, maybe the way the light caught the copper sheen of her freshly washed hair, or that faint scent of lavender that seemed to wrap itself around every movement, that kept him in a state of fevered alertness. It only took a slight tilt of her head to imagine the warmth of her neck, offered up unwittingly with each gesture. Desire struck him like a silent wave. He shifted in his seat, unsettled by the urgency that gripped him once more. Is something wrong? Liobhan asked softly, touching his arm. There was genuine concern in her gaze. No, he replied, more curtly than he meant to. He moved her hand away gently, barely a brush. I knocked my knee. Nothing serious. Her reaction was immediate. She tilted her head, attentive, and her hand moved down, inquisitive. He stopped her in time, catching her wrist before she touched something that would only complicate things further. Really, it's nothing, he said, forcing a smile. Are you sure? I could check for swelling, prepare a salve if needed. Aurnach held back a sigh. That innocent offer, made with the best of intentions, disarmed him as much as it inflamed him. He returned her hand to her lap, and searched desperately for a way out. And you? Do you feel better after some rest? The question worked. Liobhan's attention shifted away from his leg, and for a moment, a shadow of reproach crossed her face. But it faded quickly, replaced by a slow, almost childlike smile that curved her lips. Yes. The bath helped. I fell asleep without meaning to. And I devoured the food like I hadn't eaten in days, she admitted, a little sheepishly. Aurnach watched her in silence. The rest had clearly made a difference. Color had returned to her face, and her movements, though still careful, were more her own, lighter. Even so, he didn't miss the traces of exhaustion or the quiet tension behind that serene exterior. He felt torn between admiration and a kind of guilt he didn't know where to place. At Liobhan for her stubbornness, at himself for needing her so much. Without thinking, he covered her hand with his, seeking an anchor. I know I was hard on you. But I was afraid for you. You can't care for everyone if you don't care for yourself too. You seem quite used to giving orders. It comes with the job, he replied, with a crooked smile. I'd say it runs in your blood, she answered, returning the smile. For a moment, the silence between them was almost comfortable, filled with a kind of intimacy that didn't need explaining. But beneath that calm surface, the currents ran deep and dangerous. Aurnach knew it. The way she looked at him, how she sought him without realizing, how he reacted to every move she made, as if his entire body answered an unspoken command. What pulsed between them wasn't just desire. And that was what unsettled him most. Liobhan looked at him, as if she couldn't help it. There was something in the way Aurnach narrowed his eyes when he smiled, the unexpected curve of the dimples that appeared on his cheeks that disarmed any defense. In his sternness he was imposing, in his softness simply irresistible. When he offered his hand, she hesitated a moment before taking it. That large palm, hardened by old scars, held a warmth that contradicted the severity of his face. She shivered, as if that simple physical connection had awakened something deeper. Something dangerous. "If you're finished," he said in a low voice, "we'll go back to our rooms. We need to talk." She nodded, knowing what that meant. The calm they had shared lately, the laughter in the woods, the quiet by the fire, was coming to an end. The conversation ahead would be something else, a reckoning. As they left the hall under the speculative gazes of the others, Liobhan couldn't help but think of the loneliness of the past few months. The waiting. The doubts. Her anger, she thought, wasn't entirely unjustified. He had left without a word. Without a single promise. They crossed the passage between the towers, where the night air was so sharp that Liobhan shivered. Aurnach drew her closer with ease, as if his body recognized hers. The closeness brought a confusing mix of relief and anticipation. "I've been thinking of building a covered passage between the towers," he said, breaking the silence with an odd gentleness. "Maybe next year." "Or sooner," she muttered, trembling. He smiled just barely. Then he led her up the stairs to the library. Liobhan felt a stab of relief. It wasn't his room yet. A middle ground. Neutral. She walked to the window overlooking the loch, seeking the comfort of the familiar. "It's beautiful," she said without thinking. "It is," he replied, though he wasn't looking at the water, he was looking at her. Silence settled between them. She broke it with a casual question about the view. He answered with a story about his grandfather and a feast held on the cliffs of Gribben, at the MacInnes tables, where the sky itself had served as a chandelier. Liobhan laughed. Not at the story, but at the fleeting glow of affection in his voice. "Your grandfather must have been a fascinating man." "He was," said Aurnach. But his eyes were already fixed on the sea breaking against the rocks below. "But this is the view I prefer. The sea calls to me when I'm away." She understood. Not because of the words, but because of how he said them. It wasn't often he spoke about himself. That small glimpse of vulnerability moved her. Then the tension returned. He invited her to sit, and began asking questions about what had happened in the woods. His tone was calm, but the weight beneath it was unmistakable. Liobhan answered honestly, though the words came out clumsy. She felt exposed. Guilty. Like a child before a stern father. When Aurnach mentioned Kerman and his apparent lapse in judgment, she hesitated. The truth was hard to explain without seeming cold. Or worse, manipulative. "It wasn't intentional," she said finally. "Maybe I got carried away. I didn't think about the consequences, and now I regret it." He didn't answer right away. He ran a hand through his hair, as if trying to steady himself. "You shouldn't have done it," he said at last. "Not with him. Not with me. I'm not easily swayed, Liobhan." "What are you implying?" "Just this, don't lie to me. Ever." A tense silence fell between them. Liobhan felt a chill, though the room was warm. But this time it wasn't from the cold, it was from the edge in Aurnach's voice. It was more than anger. It was hurt. "You were gone so long," she said, her voice breaking with emotion she couldn't hold back. "Not a letter. Not a single word. I started to believe you weren't coming back." He came closer then, fast, without warning. Liobhan found herself suddenly in his arms, her body pinned between the stone wall and his chest. The tension in his gaze was a storm barely held in check. She didn't know if he meant to kiss her or scold her. So she decided for him. She rose on her toes and kissed him. "I want this," she whispered, as if saying it aloud could protect her from the tremble running through her body. The kiss that followed wasn't just a response. It was release. A claim. He took her as if he'd been waiting for that moment far too long, as if he didn't know how to stop. His lips were demanding, his hands sure. But there was no violence, only urgency. She gave in, not just to desire but to the recognition of what she felt. It wasn't strategy. It wasn't obedience or defiance. It was hunger. It was him. The outside world vanished. There were only mingled heartbeats, the rustle of clothing, the heat of their bodies pressed close. Liobhan knew, with a nearly primal certainty, that her life had changed. That this man, stubborn and difficult as he was, had become a part of her. And she still didn't know whether that was her greatest risk, or her only salvation. Aurnach watched her in silence, with a mix of awe and reverence. Liobhan's body was still trembling, her lips slightly parted, her gaze lost somewhere beyond herself. She was the most beautiful sight he had ever seen, pure, unguarded, overwhelmed by emotion. When she finally caught her breath, a faint flush rose to her cheeks and the rhythm of her chest began to slow. "I never imagined something like this," she whispered, her eyes still locked on his. "Is it always like this?" He hesitated. He could have soothed her with a gentle lie, but he couldn't. What he felt was too real. "No. Not always," he admitted, in a voice he barely recognized as his own. "Never, actually." She smiled, and in that smile there was tenderness, disbelief and pride. Aurnach hadn't meant for any of it to happen. He tried to keep a clear head, to speak reasonably. But when Liobhan had kissed him, with that fierce innocence, that awakening will, there was no turning back. He didn't want to resist. Not her. Not what she stirred in him. He thought he could still hold some distance, give her pleasure without taking her innocence. But then she whispered, almost shyly, "I want to touch you too. Show me how." Something inside him cracked. Desire pulsed so fiercely he could hardly breathe. When her hand brushed his thigh, he had to fight not to lose control entirely. He guided her gently, placing her hand on him, over the plaid. His body responded instantly, trembling on the edge. Liobhan's fingers explored with a mix of curiosity and reverence, and Aurnach battled the urge to surrender. It was so easy to imagine, lifting her skirt, burying himself in her heat, forgetting everything that wasn't her. But he couldn't. Not like this. Not yet. He pulled away with effort, drawing her with him to the nearby bench. There he kissed her with a tenderness that clashed with the fire consuming him. His lips traveled along the skin of her neck, so soft and warm it felt unreal. Her dress gave way under his fingers, but something, a voice, an old promise, stopped him. He pulled back abruptly, as if waking from a fevered dream. He couldn't. He mustn't. She was still vulnerable. There were wounds between them that hadn't healed. And he, though he desired her with every fiber of his being, knew he had to protect her from himself most of all. He stood, though his eyes couldn't leave her. Liobhan, sprawled on the cushions, looked like a vision stolen from another world. Her eyes were half closed, her breath unsteady, her lips still damp from his kisses. Her breasts, partly exposed, trembled faintly with each exhale. "Did I do something wrong?" she asked, trying to gather herself. "No," he murmured, turning his back, fixing his gaze on the darkness beyond the window. "I already told you how it has to be." She got up and wrapped her arms around him, as if touch could hold him there. "It doesn't have to be that way." He closed his eyes. The temptation was brutal. But there were lines he couldn't cross. Not yet. He gently removed her hands from his neck. "Why did you kiss me?" She blinked, stunned. "What are you saying?" "I just want to understand," he said, without harshness. "Was it part of some plan?" "Don't you trust me?" she asked, her voice steady, though the tremble in her lip betrayed her. "Should I?" Aurnach's gaze hardened. "You're a MacRae." His words hit like a blow. She lifted her chin, wounded but proud. "Have I given you any reason not to?" He didn't answer. He didn't know. Everything was tangled. She had appeared like a storm and upended all his certainties. "I kissed you because I wanted to," she went on. "That's all. And if I ever decided to seduce you, believe me, I wouldn't leave room for doubt." That unexpected, almost defiant confidence unraveled him. "And you?" she asked then. "Why did you bring me here?" "To talk about the attack," he said, though he no longer knew what he was after. "And about what could happen if you keep acting on your own." Liobhan met his gaze without flinching, her hair still tousled, still beautiful in her disarray. Aurnach knew he should reprimand her, set boundaries, but part of him resisted. "You may return to your chamber," he added gently. Liobhan hesitated, as if waiting for something more. A word. A gesture. But he said nothing. She turned toward the door, and just before reaching it, he stopped her. "Why did you agree to this marriage?" She turned back, surprised. "It was my father's wish." "And you? What do you wish for?" "Peace. The well-being of my people." "And love? Don't you dream of that?" "Yes," she replied. "But you've made it clear you won't offer me that." Their eyes met, heavy with all that remained unspoken. "And you?" she asked softly. "Why did you accept?" "I had no choice," he said. "It was the king's order." She looked down, and for a moment she seemed very young, very fragile. "You did your duty. But that doesn't mean you can't find joy in it." "I have found it." He swallowed hard. He wanted to say something, but all he managed was, "That doesn't change anything." Liobhan nodded slowly. A faint smile, sad but calm, touched her lips. "You're wrong," she whispered. "It changes everything." Chapter 16. When You Are Old, W.B. Yeats. But one man loved the pilgrim soul in you, and loved the sorrows of your changing face. Liobhan woke wrapped in the warmth of arms she could no longer pretend were unfamiliar. She stayed still, breathing in time with Aurnach's slow rhythm, committing to memory the firmness of his embrace, the steady rise and fall of his chest against her back, the scent of smoke, leather, and something purely masculine that now felt as familiar as her own skin. In those moments, everything seemed to fall into place. The past and future didn't matter. Only the present, warm and whole. But it never lasted long. Like every morning, the moment desire betrayed him, that involuntary tension that spoke louder than any words, Aurnach would slip away in silence, dressing with the efficiency of someone who's mastered the art of leaving no trace, and the door would close behind him like a final verdict. Sometimes he hesitated, she could feel it, as though something in him wavered, but duty or fear always won. She never opened her eyes. She preferred to let him believe she was asleep, as if simply acknowledging their closeness might break the delicate thread of intimacy spun in the dark, without names or promises, yet real. In the brush of their bodies, in how she instinctively sought his warmth in the middle of the night, a silent bond had formed. Unexpected. And to Liobhan, unbearably precious. The night in the library had marked a turning point. The gift he gave her, not just the object but the gesture, the tenderness beneath the restraint, had awakened something deeper than desire. Since then she thought of him even when she didn't want to. His fierce self-control. The way his hands could destroy or soothe. The pleasure they had shared, yes, but also the wound that still kept them apart, mistrust. She wanted to make him see he could trust her. She longed for it with a painful intensity. But how do you build trust when one of you refuses to risk it? The duties of the day pulled her back to the present. She dressed without much enthusiasm, took her breakfast in silence, and went to the library where her world had shrunk to ledgers, unanswered letters, and decisions that branched toward the unknown. Routine had become its own kind of armor, tending to Carmen, who was now well into recovery, playing games by the fire with Urchena, practicing archery, more cautiously since the hunting disaster. Urchena, for her part, was improving with astonishing speed. Beneath her delicate appearance, a determination had emerged that surprised even Liobhan. Kaedra had found her place too, pouring maternal affection into Caerman, who pretended to resist it, though less and less convincingly. Branneth, the guard, seemed to have developed a peculiar talent for appearing wherever Kaedra happened to be working. Liobhan noticed those small connections and felt a pang of longing. Life always found a way to push through, even within a castle overshadowed by war. Aurnach meanwhile buried himself in training. Retaliation from the MacRaes was only a matter of time, and he prepared like a man who couldn't afford to fail. He no longer allowed her to leave the fortress, and she didn't argue. She knew he still carried guilt over her previous attempt. But the confinement was beginning to weigh on her. The duty that had brought her there hadn't vanished. Her uncle was waiting for news. And with each passing day, Liobhan felt like she was walking a tightrope pulled ever tauter. She hadn't imagined betrayal could hurt so much, or that her loyalty would be torn between blood and heart. How could she betray those who had offered her a truer home than her own? How could she betray Aurnach, who without words had saved her, and then awakened her? She couldn't. And knowing that was like a crack opening beneath her feet. Still she had no answers. She couldn't return empty-handed, nor lie about her failure. The banner, the secret entrance, each day that passed without finding them made her excuses thinner. She clung to the hope that her father had found another way. Maybe the delay in his replies was a sign the plan had changed. Or maybe it was just space to choose. But silence could also mean abandonment. Liobhan forced herself back to work. James, the steward, had gone over the month's rents, and now she was updating the books with a precision she didn't feel. That was when Aurnach burst into the library, laughter spilling from her chest, cheeks flushed with cold air. Mud stained the hem of her dress, and the wind had tangled her curls. "What are you laughing about on such a gray day?" asked Liobhan, pulling the plaid tighter around her shoulders. "You'll never guess." Aurnach laughed, dragging a chair over beside her. "Let me see. You've decided to surrender to the pirate's charms and marry him," Liobhan teased, raising an eyebrow. Aurnach blushed, laughing in protest. "No. Branneth is just kind. You know that." Of course," said Liobhan, clearly unconvinced. "Then, Carishonas joined a convent." Aurnach's laugh was loud and sudden. "Liobhan, for heaven's sake, can you imagine that woman giving up her pleasures? The wives of half the clan would be toasting in celebration." "Then what is it?" "I beat Caerman," she said, eyes shining. The embrace was immediate, warm and sincere. "I told you. Your aim improves every day." Then with a grin, "I'll bet Caerman didn't take it well." Aurnach shrugged, still smiling. He looked like he couldn't believe it. And the men who saw it, they won't let him forget anytime soon. "Well done, Aurnach. You taught your brother a lesson today. And maybe a few others too." They both laughed. For a moment, the weight of the world lifted in that shared joy. Liobhan looked at her friend with tenderness. That girl who once second-guessed every step now stood tall with pride. And she knew that behind the teasing, Caerman knew it too. Perhaps that was what saved her as well, that invisible web of affection slowly weaving itself around her heart. Chapter 17. Aurnach paused at the threshold. Aurnach was laughing with a lightness he hadn't seen in years, and a knot tightened in his chest. That laughter, clear, unburdened, seemed to come from a time before everything fell apart. And he knew without a trace of doubt that Liobhan was the reason. How had she done it in so little time? It was as if, overnight, Aurnach had shed the cloak of shame she'd worn for nearly 2 years and returned to herself. Like a figure revealed by fire on the night of Beltane. Even in the heart of winter, Duncoran felt warmer from the light their laughter cast. Aurnach's gaze settled on Liobhan. She had changed too. The guardedness she carried when she arrived had softened. She was no longer the outsider. She had woven herself quietly into the life of the castle. That unsettled him more than he wanted to admit. The thought of her leaving, of her plan weighed on him with unexpected heaviness. He never tired of looking at her. Hers was a beauty that didn't fade with familiarity, but grew sharper. As if each day revealed a new facet beneath the flawless surface, a gesture, a retort, a flicker of doubt in her eyes. Something real. Something that felt like it belonged to him. He wasn't the only one who noticed. He'd caught more than one man glancing at her when they thought he wasn't looking. It irritated him, yes, but not out of jealousy. No man was made of stone. Least of all him. Even now, bent over her scrolls, fingers stained with ink and hair loose around her shoulders, she seemed unaware of the effect she had. Her focus pulled her lips into a shape that was both defiant and amused. And he couldn't look away. He thought of the morning. Of her warm breath against his neck. Of her body curled against his. A month of nights like that, and the torment hadn't dulled, it had sharpened. He'd thought he would get used to it. He hadn't. Sleeping beside her was a constant provocation. And she didn't seem to realize. Or maybe she did. Sometimes he thought she did. She was still a maiden. And he, for now, a man holding back. But restraint had its limits. Still he watched her. He couldn't help it. She was a MacRae, the niece of his enemy. But he hadn't seen her sneaking through corridors or currying favor. Quite the opposite. She seemed determined to move as little as necessary. And yet, she occupied more space every day. The library was hers now too, as once his sister had been, as once his room had been. Liobhan had settled in without noise, without asking. Soon, if he didn't act, she'd take even his chair. The thought made him smile. Liobhan looked up, startled, when Aurnach entered the room. His visits to the library had been rare since Aurnach and she had claimed the space, and at that time of day even less likely. It was the hour of sparring, when he usually trained with his men in the courtyard. His hair was tousled, his shirt clung to his torso with sweat, and his skin still glowed from exertion. Liobhan felt something spark inside her too, warm and electric, as she remembered what that strong body was capable of, and how strangely natural it had felt to be cradled in his arms. It wasn't something that faded with time. She still had to force herself to look away from his hard, striking face, from the energy he seemed to carry with him into any room. It wasn't just his height or the breadth of his shoulders. It was something harder to name. A kind of gravity. "Looks like Aurnach just beat Kerman in an impromptu archery match," said Liobhan, breaking the silence with a smile. Aurnach raised an eyebrow and turned to his sister. For a moment, both women waited for his reaction. Then his lips curled into a slow smile, and deep dimples appeared on his cheeks. "So our sister made that braggart fall into his own trap," he said, amused. "He spent weeks boasting that no girl could best him. I suppose he's just learned a valuable lesson: never underestimate your opponent. It's a mistake that in combat comes at a high price." And as he looked past Aurnach, his eyes met Liobhan's. "I never underestimate my opponent." She flushed instantly, not quite knowing why. "Well done, Aurnach. I'm proud of you," Aurnach added, lifting her in a brotherly embrace. Her laughter filled the room. "Maybe I'm ready to challenge you at the spring gathering," Aurnach joked, radiant. "I'd be honored," Aurnach replied warmly. "But you'll have to train hard if you want to beat me." Liobhan couldn't help but smile back. "I hope your instructor can make room in her schedule," he said, looking directly at her. "Of course," she replied, barely more than a whisper. Aurnach turned to Aurnach again, this time more serious. "But you know you won't be able to compete in the gathering. It's an old tradition. Only warriors participate." Liobhan knew well that those gatherings dated back to Donal MacLean, meant to test the men of the clan. Aurnach arched a brow. "Besides, if you won, it would be a humiliation the men of Scotland might never recover from." Liobhan's laughter joined Aurnach's. Seeing Aurnach so relaxed, so open, touched her more deeply than she cared to admit. It was a side of him he rarely showed. and it was impossible not to want more of it. Urchenna, elated, launched into plans for her training routine before darting out the door. Aurnach watched her go, still smiling. "You've done something I thought impossible, Liobhan. You've brought her back to me." The warmth in his voice disarmed her. No man from her world had ever thanked her for something like that, least of all with such honesty. It felt like an act of strength, not weakness. "I didn't do anything," she said softly. "I was just her friend. It's easy to love Urchenna. I feel like I've always known her." She hesitated before adding, more serious, "I think the end of the feud between the clans was a relief for her." He tensed at that. "What do you mean?" "I think vengeance kept her trapped in the past. She feels responsible for what happened. For everything that was done in her name." Aurnach stayed silent. When he spoke, it was with gravity. "And our hatred was a constant reminder." "I know," said Liobhan gently. "But she doesn't blame you. She understands you were doing your duty. So was Cairman." Aurnach looked up, focused. "Cairman. He needs to feel useful. It's not enough for you to believe he's capable. He needs to know it. To feel it." Aurnach nodded slowly. "Maybe you're right. I haven't delegated much to him. Without that, perhaps he thinks I doubt him. If you don't give him responsibilities, he'll never be able to redeem himself in his own eyes." He looked at her with renewed attention, assessing her. "He must trust you if he spoke to you about Pedruig. He blames himself. I don't. In his place, I would have done the same." "Then show him you don't blame him. Give him a task that matters." Aurnach straightened, crossing his arms but with no trace of anger, only thoughtful tension. "I'm laird. I take on my duties." "And yet you can't do it all," said Liobhan with a tilted smile. "Not for lack of skill, but because no one can." He let out a short laugh. "I'll think about it." There was a pause, lighter now, until Aurnach asked, "And you? What about your family? What do you want to know? Why pain flickers in your eyes every time you mention them?" She looked away. "There's not much to tell. My mother died young. My father was busy with his duties. And my brothers had their own interests. That's not uncommon. Our father wasn't involved either. It was the custom." "But you're not like that," said Liobhan frankly. "You look after your siblings." Aurnach shrugged. "Maybe they didn't know how. Doesn't mean they didn't love you." His words, unexpectedly compassionate, struck a tender chord. Maybe he was right. Maybe she'd mistaken their silence for indifference, when it was just clumsiness. He was watching her intently, but said nothing more. Something unspoken, almost solemn, lingered between them. "Did you need something?" she asked at last. "Yes. A favor. I was wondering if you could help me organize the spring gathering at Dun Coran." Liobhan looked at him, moved. Not by the task, but by the gesture. "Of course. Tell me what you need." To start with, a list of the invited clans. She began to think of names. Aurnach MacInnes, MacLean, Ardmore, then stopped. "Will my family be invited too? Fiona and Farquhar must be present. Our marriage is also an alliance. The king has decreed it," he said calmly but firmly. Liobhan forced herself to nod. Then she thought of another possibility. "And the MacRae. All the local clans." And seeing her unease, he took her hand. "No one will break the sacred hospitality of the Highlands. They'll come to compete, not to seek revenge." She drew a deep breath. "What contests will there be?" "The usual: caber toss, hammer throw, wrestling, swimming. We'll also need to arrange lodging, meals, banquets. Will you have time?" "I'll make time. I'll start with the guest list." There was a knock at the door. Aurnach invited them in, and Branneth appeared holding a letter. A message for you, my lady. Liobhan straightened, hopeful. A letter from her father? It's from your uncle, said Branath, handing her the parchment sealed with Farquhar's crest. Aurnach saw it too. His expression barely shifted, but his eyes darkened. How convenient. Since you're preparing the invitation for your uncle, you can give it to the messenger yourself. Liobhan held the letter between her fingers, feeling the weight of the past settle on her shoulders once more. The reminder had arrived. Chapter 18. It is too rash, too unadvised, too sudden. Too like the lightning which doth cease to be. Ere one can say it lightens. Act 2, Scene 2, Romeo and Juliet. Shakespeare. Liobhan had known it would happen sooner or later. But why now, just when she had begun to feel she had a place in Duncoran? A place that mattered. The letter with its unmistakable seal offered no illusions. Her marriage to Aurnach was a means to an end, not an end in itself. She was grateful that Aurnach left her alone to read it. He didn't ask, though curiosity flickered in his eyes. She didn't offer an explanation either. She sat by the fire, broke the seal with tense fingers, and began to read. Her uncle chastised her silence, dressing it up as concern. He urged her to write, to confirm that all was well with her new husband. He mentioned rumors of a possible MacRae attack on Dunstafnage, a thinly veiled reminder of her role. The letter dropped into her lap. She stared at the fire, now dull, and wrapped the plaid around her shoulders. The cold seeped deeper inside than out. She would have to choose. And there was no way to do it without betraying someone. Aurnach. Or her family. At Duncoran she had found something like peace. Urchenna was a true friend. Cairman, a man with a child's soul she already felt was hers. And Aurnach. Aurnach had started to see her. To trust her with things. He had let her stay, manage the accounts, care for his people. But he still planned to send her back. And he still hadn't truly made her his wife. Liobhan twisted a lock of hair between her fingers. Every time she thought they were moving forward, something got in the way. This time, a letter. How could she stand by her uncle against a man like Aurnach? If it were only about the lordship of the Isles, the choice would be simple. But her clan was at stake. The MacRaes of Fionla wouldn't survive without Farquhar's support. Without land, they'd be nothing. She didn't want to fail them. But she didn't want to give up what she had begun to build at Duncoran either. Then something clicked. The MacRae were the common enemy. If Aurnach backed her father, Farquhar wouldn't be necessary. Maybe she wouldn't have to betray anyone. No need to steal the banner. No need to speak of the secret passage. But Aurnach wouldn't agree to an alliance like that so easily. He still planned to send her away. How to stop him? He had to fall in love with her. Only then could everything change. She knew wanting him wasn't enough. She had to make him see that their union could be as valuable as any political alliance. That even as a MacRae, she could be his most loyal ally. One thing was certain, Aurnach wouldn't forgive another betrayal. She had seen it in his face when he caught her exploring the tower. She couldn't tell him her intentions. Not yet. If she failed, she would lose everything. But if she succeeded, she would find her place. She would earn his respect. And maybe his love. That thought made her rise to her feet. She let the letter fall to the ground, picked it up without hesitation, and threw it into the fire. She watched it burn, betrayal reduced to smoke. She smoothed her skirt and took a deep breath. Sharing his bed wasn't enough. She wanted it all. The intimacy, the surrender. She wanted to fight for him. And tonight she would begin. She climbed the stairs with purpose. She would change for dinner. Then she would wait for him. But when she opened the door, the plan vanished. The room smelled of steam, warm wood, and sandalwood. He was there. Aurnach had just stepped out of the bath, wrapped only in a towel. Water still slid down his scarred torso. His gaze met hers like a flame. Desire. Raw, absolute. She froze, her heart pounding. One more step, and everything would change. "What are you doing?" he said, his voice tight. "I came to dress for dinner. I didn't know you were here. You need to go." But she didn't move. One step closer. He was breathing hard, struggling to restrain himself. He took her by the chin. "Are you sure? This won't change anything," he murmured, voice low and hoarse. "Even if I wish it would." She swallowed hard. Did he? Hope sparked deep inside her. Yes, she was sure. The brief conversation unraveled in the air like a thread without a knot. Aurnach no longer found words, only the dull thrum of desire pulsing in his temples. He felt the blood churning in his chest, the tremor in his wrists, his breath faltering just from her presence. From the moment Liobhan had stepped through the doorway, something in him had cracked. Maybe it was her gaze, that near defiant glint in her violet eyes, or the way the light played on her loose hair. But beyond what the eye could see, it was the quiet certainty, the deep recognition that there was something inevitable between them. She looked at him in silence. And he waited. He wouldn't, take another step without knowing she came to him freely. Not out of loneliness or fear, but because she wanted to. Without masks, without excuses. If that wasn't enough to redeem him, at least it would be his only defense. Then she raised a hand and brushed his arm. The touch was so light he barely felt it, and yet his entire body reacted as if seared by fire. "I understand," she whispered. "No promises." That was all it took. Aurnach pulled her to him with an urgent gesture, tempered only by the tremor of emotion. Liobhan rested against his chest, exhaling a breath that wasn't surrender but recognition. At last, their desire was no longer a secret. With restrained awkwardness, he buried his fingers in her hair, loosening one of her braids, which slid apart like silk in his hands. He looked into her eyes, searching for hesitation, for the smallest crack in her resolve, but found only a reflection of his own longing. He leaned in and kissed her. The first touch was soft, almost reverent. But the moment their lips met, need devoured them. She answered without shyness, with the urgency of someone who had also waited too long. Her mouth was warm, alive, a place he wanted to belong to. Her taste disoriented him. It was like drinking from a spring after a long thirst. A low moan escaped his chest, part relief, part surrender. What began in tenderness turned to hunger. He kissed her deeper, insatiable, as if he needed to remember her with every cell. She didn't pull away. On the contrary, she sought him, held him, challenged him to keep going. But even then, in the midst of fervor, part of him remained alert. He couldn't take her, driven only by his desire. He shut his eyes tight and swallowed hard. He couldn't forget this was her first time. He pulled his lips from hers and moved to her throat, kissing her slowly, gently. He heard her sigh, felt her shiver, tilt her head to give him more. Her skin was soft and warm, and the faint tremble beneath his tongue lit a fierce tenderness in him. He lingered at the base of her neck, at the curve of her shoulders. He breathed in her lavender scent, the fragrance he now linked to the very idea of desire. She arched toward him, impatient, her breath unsteady. With trembling hands, she began untying her bodice. He looked at her for confirmation, and she gave a slight nod, cheeks flushed. He undressed her with the care of someone revealing a secret. No haste, no roughness. Each garment that fell to the floor was like a silent vow. When she was bare, he held his breath. Not because her body was perfect, but because of the trust with which she gave herself. He said nothing. He simply held her and led her to the bed. There upon the sheets he kissed her again, this time with calm. To touch her was to be awed. His hands did not seek to conquer her, but to memorize her. With every caress she responded with a subtle shift, a caught breath, eyes closed as if to hold on to every sensation. Aurnach felt himself unraveling. Everything in her called to him, But he resisted. He didn't want to rush anything. When his fingers found her wet and open, his breath caught. He knew she was ready, but not yet. He slid downward, tracing kisses along her belly. He held her hips and looked up, and she didn't turn away. He touched her with his mouth, gently, reverently, and heard her whisper his name, confused, surprised, but still there. Her surrender was shy and total, and it undid him. When he returned to her side, she welcomed him with open arms. "Trust me," he murmured. "I do," she said. And then, at last, it was as if everything aligned. As if the waiting, the restraint, the silences and glances had led to this single moment. He took her with the slowness that respect demands, with the passion of a man who loves for the first time. He heard her catch her breath, felt her body tremble, but she didn't pull away. And when their bodies joined, something in him changed. It was no longer just desire. It was belonging. A bond born of fire and trembling. It was Liobhan. Ashamed, Liobhan couldn't believe what had just happened. But her will was as fragile as a leaf in a storm. As if the sun could deny the moon its place in the sky. She couldn't push him away, her own body wouldn't allow it. Every touch from him was a blaze. She felt pleasure blooming inside her, a sweet fever that unmoored her. She wanted more. She wanted everything. "Tell me what you want, Liobhan," he murmured. She shuddered as his mouth descended again, reigniting that uncontrollable flame. "Tell me," he insisted, his voice hoarse, brushing the edge of the forbidden. "I want." Her voice broke. "Like before. You want me to take you there again?" The world dissolved around her. There was no shame, no modesty, nothing but need. "Yes," she whispered. "Please." He laughed softly and kissed her as if he would never be satisfied. His words were a spell, but what he did with his mouth was an even stronger enchantment. Liobhan had no defense against that subtle, relentless assault that kept lifting her higher and higher. And when he found the center of her desire once more, the explosion was inevitable. She felt her body shatter beneath the force of that wave, as if it no longer belonged to her. She lay trembling, undone, sated. And when she saw him smile, she knew he'd seen it too, that total surrender. "I'm not finished with you, MacRae. This is only the beginning." He rose over her, bracing his hands on either side of her head. Liobhan opened her eyes, still lost in the haze of pleasure. With his body above hers, she took him in, the broad, strong chest marked with scars. She ran her fingers across it, memorizing each line, each mark. Beneath that living armor, she found warmth and safety. Beneath his weight, paradoxically, she felt light. Touching his body was touching a different kind of power. Not the kind that conquers, but the kind that protects. And yet, she had power too. She discovered it when she slid her hand down his abdomen, and found him with a slow, deliberate gesture. There was no fabric between them now. She wrapped her hand around him gently, and the sensation surprised her, restrained strength beneath the softest skin. When she looked up, she saw him holding back a moan, his features tense, his eyes half-lidded. "Teach me," she whispered. For a moment, she thought he hadn't heard. But then he opened his eyes. In them something flickered, almost a tremor. "I don't know if I can endure it." "Try." That plea was enough. He guided her hand, showed her the rhythm. She watched, fascinated by how his face unraveled with pleasure, as if her touch could dismantle him. And she understood, this warrior was hers. "Enough," he said suddenly, his voice tight. He pulled her hand away. "I can't wait any longer." He touched her, and she trembled. He leaned in, his lips grazing her ear. "Feel how your body calls to me. You're ready for me." He took her by the hips and lifted her gently. The press of his body was slow, teasing. She opened to receive him, but as he began to enter, her body tensed. It was too much. Her instinct was to close. "Trust me," he whispered. "It will only be a moment." And then he entered her deep. The pain was sharp, unexpected. Liobhan froze, a silent cry caught in her throat. He covered her mouth with his own, holding her still. Easy. I'm with you. Listen to me. Feel my mouth. He kissed her tenderly, with a patience that unmade her. Slowly the pain ebbed. A new sensation replaced it, something unknown, profound, that filled her completely. When he began to move, he did it with a slow, measured rhythm like a dance. Liobhan clung to his shoulders, and her body, already surrendered, began to respond, to seek him. With each thrust the desire surged again, stronger, deeper. She felt the world shrink to that exact point where they were joined. Everything in her vibrated toward an inevitable end. She wrapped her legs around him, opened fully. And then it came. Like a great wave, like a storm of light, like a surrender. Her body broke, and with it, everything she thought she knew. In that moment he plunged one last time and poured his release into her. He moaned her name and collapsed on top of her. They were no longer two, but one. United, whole, in the calm eye of a storm. The heat of their entwined bodies filled the room like a thick mist. Neither of them wanted to break that invisible bond. When he finally withdrew, he pulled her against his chest. They fit together like two pieces made to match. Liobhan closed her eyes, letting herself melt into that quiet warmth. She didn't know if it could last. She didn't want to think about it. She just listened to the steady rhythm of Aurnach's heart, and let it lull her, as if that sound alone could keep her safe from everything. Chapter 19. The morning sun filtered through the curtains when Liobhan felt, before even opening her eyes, the warm presence of Aurnach at her back. Her body, still suspended between sleep and waking, recognized the firm press of his desire. This time, he didn't pull away. His hands sought her with a slowness that spoke more of longing than urgency, as if he wanted to memorize her by touch. When he entered her from behind, it was with a restrained tenderness that stole her breath. Liobhan clung to the sensation of fullness, of being taken by him in a new, deeper way. He moved over her with his hands, his lips, with a delicacy that contrasted with the strength of his body. There was no shyness in her, only the surrender of someone who trusts without hesitation. "Did I surprise you?" murmured Aurnach, his voice rough against her ear, never ceasing to move within her. "A little," she whispered. "But I like it." She didn't know how or when it had happened, but there was no longer space for fear. He had stripped her of shame and defenses, and now everything in her answered to his touch. She shivered as his caresses grew bolder, as his rhythm changed and brought her to the edge of something vast. He spoke to her in a low voice, sensual promises that vibrated beyond meaning. "Do you know how long I've dreamed of this?" he said between deep thrusts. "Do you know what torture it was not to touch you when you curled up beside me at night?" "I didn't know," she replied, unraveling in his arms. He didn't seek his release inside her. He withdrew at the last moment, leaving his warmth on the sheets. Liobhan felt a sudden emptiness, as if something essential had slipped away. She turned to him, looking for answers. He gazed at her for a long time before speaking. "I've taken your innocence. But I won't risk getting you with child." His words were a clean cut. The rawness of truth laid bare stole her breath. She wanted to pull away, to hide the wound, but the pain was too deep. What had she expected? That love would be enough? That he would forsake his duties just because she loved him? The realization struck with unexpected clarity. She loved him. Not like a girl smitten with a handsome face, but with the certainty of someone who had found home in another soul. She loved all of him, his strength, his reserve, his way of touching her like she was both fragile and his. She loved him even if she couldn't keep him. At Duncoran she had found what had always been denied to her: belonging, safety, affection. Aurnach had given her all that, and unknowingly he had also given her the truth about herself. But he wouldn't give her a child. He wouldn't give her a future. "Do you regret it?" he asked, his voice barely a whisper. Liobhan shook her head. She couldn't let him see how much it hurt. She mustn't. "No. I just didn't know what this would feel like. He nodded, relieved, and pulled her against his chest. Liobhan let herself be held, but her mind no longer rested. Time was slipping through their fingers. What if their plan failed? What if he never came to love her? She clung to his warmth, knowing every moment with him might be the last. She decided then to savor every bit of happiness, every glance, every touch, to make them last a lifetime. Hours later, Aurnach forced himself out of bed. Liobhan's sleeping body, tangled in the sheets, was a temptation hard to resist, but he couldn't stay. They had shared more than bodies that night. She had given him everything, without reservation. And he, what had he done? He dressed in silence. Out in the hallway, he ran into his brother. "Did you sleep well?" asked Caerman, barely hiding a smile. Aurnach shot him a look. "Where are Douglas and Branneth?" "In the private dining room." Aurnach didn't answer. The entire castle seemed to know what had happened. In the hall, his men rose as he entered. Branneth stepped forward with a letter. "It arrived this morning. I thought you wouldn't want to be disturbed." The seal of Ardmore. Aurnach broke the wax. The message was clear. The king was willing to hear him out regarding Aurnach. It was what he'd been waiting for. And yet, he felt an invisible noose tighten around his neck. Liobhan was slipping through his fingers. "Will you dissolve the trial marriage?" asked Caerman, voicing what everyone was thinking. Aurnach swallowed hard. "Yes. It's necessary." He was lying. But he couldn't say otherwise. Politics, the survival of the clan, demanded it. Even if it cost him the one thing he was starting to want more than victory, her. They continued discussing the MacRae movements. Then Caerman mentioned something that made him look up. "Are you sure?" he asked, frowning. "Fergus MacRae knew you'd been with Ardmore," Caerman said. "I was half conscious, but I heard him." Aurnach's brow furrowed. Only a few had known about that visit. A dull unease settled in his chest. He thought of the letter Liobhan had received. Thought of how easily he'd trusted her. "Did she send any letters while I was gone?" Douglas hesitated for a moment. "Only one. To her father." "It must have been a coincidence," Caerman said quickly. Douglas looked at him, serious. "Can we trust her? She's a MacRae." Aurnach didn't answer right away. He closed his eyes and saw her face, the gentleness with which she'd touched his shoulder that night. Her laughter, her tenderness with Urchenna. The way she had given herself to him, without conditions. In his heart, the answer was clear. Yes. I trust her. But he also knew that if he was wrong, if Liobhan had betrayed him, what he would lose wasn't just a battle, it was far more than that. And he didn't know if he could survive it. Chapter 20. Where the Mist is Born. When the Christmas lights dimmed, and winter slowly gave way to the promise of spring, Liobhan remained true to her purpose, to draw every bit of joy she could from her time at Duncorran. She shared her days and nights with Aurnach, and though their bond was not sealed by an eternal vow, it held a depth that unraveled her. Only once was that daily surrender interrupted. A few weeks after Christmas, when her body reminded her that it still belonged to her alone. She hadn't expected a child, not without a husband, but the disappointment caught her off guard. Even more so Aurnach's poorly concealed relief, which, though understandable, hurt her deeply. Sometimes she thought she had succeeded, that Aurnach was beginning to care for her. In the stillness of the night, in his arms, it felt impossible that anything could come between them. He laughed with her during meals, sought her gaze during preparations for the Highland Games, and sometimes watched her with a tenderness she didn't know how to name. But other times, the illusion faded. Aurnach had not mentioned their trial marriage again, nor spoken of what would happen after July. When Liobhan hinted at a future beyond that month, he deflected the conversation, sometimes with an awkward smile, other times with a silence more eloquent than words. One conversation in particular unsettled her, when he asked about the letter she had sent to her father. He had seemed afraid she had revealed something critical, though after a couple of evasive answers, he appeared reassured. Since then, he hadn't brought it up again. Many nights she longed to tell him she loved him, but she sensed her words wouldn't bring comfort, only discomfort. Or guilt. And she couldn't risk what little they had built. Not yet. Not without an alternative to the alliance with Ardmore. What they had, this fragile, precious balance, had to be preserved. Time passed too quickly. Especially at night. And sometimes during the day. She still remembered the fragrant, sun-warmed heath where Aurnach had taken her, once he allowed her beyond the castle walls. What began as a simple escape became something more. A revelation. She had learned much since that first winter night. She was no longer the frightened girl trembling under his touch, but a woman aware of her desire, and her power. When she wasn't in Aurnach's arms or walking the castle with him, Liobhan immersed herself in practical tasks, organizing the clan assembly, managing the accounts, coordinating festivities. And with particular joy, helping prepare a wedding. She had long known of Suma's interest in Kaedra, but it was Kaedra herself who, with a mix of shyness and pride, announced their engagement. Liobhan was sincerely happy for her, though the thought of losing her weighed more than she had expected. Only 3 months remained. At the assembly, Liobhan would have to face her father. She would have to explain what she had achieved or what she hadn't. But today, her thoughts were elsewhere. The air smelled of living earth, of newborn sunlight. The castle courtyard buzzed with voices and color. The ceremony had been brief but beautiful, and now long tables adorned with wildflowers welcomed the guests. Liobhan took a deep breath. The sea sparkled with an almost unreal clarity, and the heather fields glowed in the afternoon light. Winter was retreating, and life was returning. "It's a beautiful day for a wedding," said Aurnach, approaching without Liobhan hearing her come. "Perfect," Liobhan replied with a smile. They had worked tirelessly to have everything ready. Kaedra had insisted. She didn't want to give Suma's time to change his mind. Liobhan looked at her fondly. She radiated happiness. "I'll miss her," she murmured without thinking. Aurnach didn't reply at first. She didn't need to. Liobhan knew she understood. "She'll always love you," she said at last. "To her, you're a daughter. For many years she was all I had." "I know." They didn't speak of the rest. Not the looming end of the agreement with Aurnach, nor the silence they both shared when thinking about what might come after. No regrets. "It's a day for celebration," said Aurnach, then added with a crooked smile, "By the way, where's your Viking hiding?" "He's not my Viking," Liobhan replied, blushing. "Oh no." "Well, not yet." They had no time to say more. Aurnach appeared, radiant in the sunlight, with that mix of confidence and charm that still took her breath away. "Is everything as you wanted, Liobhan? Even the weather seems to have obeyed you." "Thank you," she said. "This day meant a lot to Kaedra, and to me. You've worked non-stop. You deserve a break." And before she could protest, he swept her into his arms and spun her, making her laugh. "Aurnach MacInnes. Put me down this instant. You're not working today. Today you dance." "Do you promise?" she whispered, caught in the bright blue of his eyes. "I promise." "Please don't speak of your bedroom exploits in front of me," Aurnach interrupted with mock indignation. My chaste ears couldn't bear it. Aurnach set Liobhan down and stole a quick kiss. "I'll have to warn Branath to restrain himself." "I don't know what you're talking about," said Aurnach, crossing her arms. "We'll see," Aurnach replied. Liobhan delighted in those jokes. The bonds between them were genuine, warm. Despite everything, she felt at home. "Before the dancing starts, Aurnach and I have a surprise," she announced, taking her friend's hand. "Ready?" Aurnach nodded, swallowing hard. "Yes." They walked off toward the tower, as the men watched with suspicion. "What are they plotting now?" asked Caerman. I don't know, said Aurnach, watching the door they'd vanished through. But Urchena looked nervous. Minutes later, the two women reappeared. Aurnach saw them first. The son seemed to pause. Good God, he murmured. How did she do it? Do what? Asked Caerman and Branath, turning only to fall speechless themselves. The three men stood frozen as they watched her approach, as if time itself had stopped. Gradually, the conversations around them faded, until a heavy, expectant silence spread over the crowd like sudden fog. Then the quiet broke into cheers, erupting into an ovation that seemed to shake even the stones of the castle. Aurnach was the first to move. He crossed the space between them with long, determined strides, but when he stopped in front of his sister, he hesitated. As if still unable to believe what he was seeing, he lifted a hand and brushed her cheek with his fingers. Where once there had been an opaque patch, her skin now showed a thin white scar in the shape of a star, stretching from her eyelid to her forehead. It was visible, yes, but not grotesque. His gaze met hers, two eyes the same deep blue he remembered, and he felt something in his chest give way. He began, but couldn't finish the sentence. It was nothing but a nudge, Liobhan said gently. And a mirror. She just needed to see herself with different eyes. Urchena's smile was faint but steady. She turned to Aurnach, as if something deeper rested on his reaction. Branath arrived just then, pushing past his laird without ceremony, and took Urchena's hand with a delicacy unusual for him. He brought it to his lips. What sorcery is this? He murmured, his voice thick with emotion. You're even more beautiful than I remember. I didn't think it possible. There was such truth in his words that Liobhan knew Urchena wouldn't doubt. The young woman lowered her eyes, shy and grateful at once. Thank you, Branath. But there's no witchcraft here. Only my stubborn sister, who refused to give up. I hadn't looked in a mirror in years, until I dared. And it wasn't as terrible as I remembered. Still, I was terrified of how you'd react. Caerman burst in with his usual enthusiasm, and hugged Urchena so tightly he lifted her off the ground. I'm afraid this will completely ruin your aim with a bow. I have no advantage left. He winked. Can I keep the patch? Maybe it'll bring me luck. Urchena let out a laugh that eased the tension in everyone. All yours, MacInnes. I don't need it anymore. Aurnach watched them without moving, yet something churned violently inside him. Liobhan had achieved the unthinkable. She had brought his sister back not only to public life, but to herself. He thought she could no longer surprise him, but she had. Not because of physical desire, though he felt that with a force that still took his breath away, but because of everything she was. The woman he had come to know day by day, perceptive, stubborn, generous, with that way of laughing like she could dismantle the world. He loved how she wrinkled her nose when something annoyed her, how she twisted her hair between her fingers when deep in thought. He knew that when she said, "As you wish," she rarely meant it. He had started by entrusting her with castle duties, and ended up admiring her practicality, her clear-eyed way of seeing things. He liked her company, her presence, even her silences. And what undid him most, Liobhan had begun to heal parts of him he hadn't even known were wounded. She had helped Urchena without asking for anything in return. She had brought laughter back to Duncoran. But what Aurnach couldn't offer her, and he knew it, was certainty. Despite what he felt, despite what was growing between them, he still hadn't found a way to protect her from his uncertain future. He didn't want to promise what he might not be able to keep. With each passing day, the dilemma became more unbearable. And still, he couldn't let her go. He turned to her. Without caring who was watching, he cupped her face in his hands and made her look at him. Liobhan. His voice broke. That was rare for him, showing himself like this. You gave me my sister back. Not just her face, her spirit. I don't know how to thank you. She said nothing, but her eyes spoke for her. He kissed her. Not with urgency, but with a tenderness that surprised even him, as if in that gesture he tried to hold everything he didn't dare say. For a moment, the world disappeared. There was only her mouth, her warmth, the familiarity of a body he already knew but still craved with a new hunger. "This," he murmured when they parted, "this isn't over." And though he knew he'd have to postpone what his body demanded with urgency, he allowed himself to hold her a moment longer. Later, there would be a celebration. And after that, perhaps if fate allowed, they could celebrate each other too. Chapter 21. Barely 2 weeks later, Liobhan stood beside Aurnach at the top of the Seagate staircase, welcoming the clans gathered at Dun Coran for the banquet that would open the games. She wore a simple yellow silk dress that the wind seemed to admire as much as the guests. Though she held her head high, her hands twisted discreetly, betraying her nerves. Facing her family after 9 months would not be easy. The castle buzzed with music and scents. Bagpipes wove melodies through the stone walls, and the smell of roasting meat drifted in like a promise. Warriors' laughter filled the air. In the vestibule, tankards struck tables with festive impatience. And then she saw them. Her family was climbing the stairs. Her heart skipped a beat. "Welcome to Dun Coran, father, uncle," she said, trying to keep her voice steady. "Was the journey peaceful?" "Unusually so," her father replied, kissing her cheek politely. But his eyes settled on Aurnach's hand resting at her waist. "You look well. Has life in Dun Coran agreed with you as much as it seems?" "Very much, father," Liobhan murmured, lowering her eyes to her shoes. She could feel the warmth of a joy she didn't dare show. She wanted to believe the hardness in her uncle's expression was only in her imagination. It wasn't. "You're radiant, niece. That flush, is it the air of Mull or something more?" Farquhar's smile didn't reach his eyes. "It's reassuring to see your trial marriage going so well. A year is a long time, anything could happen." Aurnach removed his hand from her waist. Liobhan, without looking at him directly, noticed the subtle clench of his jaw, a signal anyone else would have missed but not her. Still, he didn't rise to the bait. Instead, he replied calmly. "My sister said something similar recently, though she was speaking of how long a year can feel." Farquhar flushed. Liobhan stifled a laugh. "I hope you found what you came looking for," he said then, blunt. "Much more than I expected, uncle," Liobhan replied, glancing briefly at Aurnach. "Forgive my silence. I've been busy preparing for this gathering. We'll have time to speak calmly later." "Don't wait too long," he said curtly. The tension eased slightly with the arrival of her brothers. "Liobhan at last!" Ian exclaimed, embracing her with enthusiasm. Ian had their uncle's stature, but not his harshness. Though his face was almost too perfect to be handsome without seeming suspicious, a scar lent him character and humanity. Liobhan looked at him with near childlike wonder. Had he really missed her? What if Aurnach had been right? What if they hadn't forgotten her, just left her space? "I've missed you too," she said emotionally. "We'll talk after the banquet. But don't overdo the Uiski Bitha if you plan to compete tomorrow." Her brother's laughter followed her into the vestibule. Ian, always sharp, whispered to her. "I hope you haven't convinced Aurnach to let women compete. Or is he afraid the MacInnes will sweep the archery contest, if you do?" "Ah, but you should see Urchenna," Liobhan replied. "Lately she outshoots me." "Really? I never thought anyone could." Ian glanced at Aurnach with interest. Having a sister skilled with a bow might come in handy. Liobhan turned to him, surprised. Was that an innocent comment or something more pointed? Pride flared in her chest. Ian looked thoughtful. "And her injury? Doesn't it hold her back?" "She makes up for it with near-perfect aim," said Liobhan, then turned to Farquhar with a smile. "I think you'll all find Urchenna quite changed." In the vestibule, the noise of the banquet drowned out any further conversation. The following afternoon, Liobhan regretted not following her own advice. The Uiski Bitha had left her head pounding as if haunted by invisible bagpipes. But she didn't retreat. Watching Aurnach compete made everything hurt less. Made everything matter more. The MacInnes were dominating the games. Aurnach had won the swimming contest with ease, and only lost the hill race to Caermann, who now called him Old Man. Liobhan was eagerly awaiting the log toss and the archery trials. But for now, all she wanted was a bit of shade and silence. Enjoying the show, niece? Your trial husband doesn't disappoint. Farquhar's voice broke into her brief respite. She was alone, near the edge of the forest. He had waited for the right moment. Not surprising, she answered, calm though she didn't feel it. Aurnach's skill is well known. But I suppose you didn't come to talk about the games. He raised an eyebrow. No. I want to know why you haven't sent word. Where's the secret entrance? Where's the banner? He grabbed her arm roughly. Liobhan took a deep breath. I haven't found anything yet. Or you have and decided not to say, he hissed. Have you forgotten your duty, smitten with your husband? Foolish girl. He was meant to fall for you, not the other way around. She stepped back. He was dangerous when angry. I haven't found the entrance, she repeated, firm. Then you'd best do it soon. The MacRae are holding back, only because I allow it. Don't underestimate what's at stake. Liobhan turned pale. The words were a threat, and not an empty one. Her duty still hung over her like an anchor. But she could no longer pretend she was indifferent to what it dragged behind it. I know what's at stake, she said, keeping her voice steady. Farquhar watched her coldly. Is he in love with you? I don't know. Has he spoken of marriage? No. Does he suspect? No. I've been careful. Then you'd better remember why you're here, he spat, drawing out the words. Look at your husband, chatting with Ardmore, the MacRae's most cunning enemy. If you don't do what you came to do, everything we are will vanish. You'll do your duty, or you'll pay the price. You can't tell him, Liobhan whispered, horrified. Farquhar's face twisted into a poisonous smile. Do you think he'll forgive you, Liobhan? That he'll understand you've been spying on him, on my orders? Liobhan felt panic clawing its way up her throat. She had wanted to tell him. In time. When everything was ready. But her uncle wouldn't let her go so easily. Not without a fight. A rustle in the leaves stopped Liobhan in her tracks. She turned, holding her breath. Had someone overheard her conversation with her uncle? Silence returned, thick as fog. She waited a moment longer, in vain. Nothing moved. She exhaled, but unease still clung to her skin. Aurnach had been watching from the shadow of the trees. He didn't like the way Farquhar approached her, the tone he used, or the way he had grabbed her arm. Something wasn't right. And he had waited long enough. He stepped out of the clearing. Are you all right, Liobhan? She startled, as if emerging from another scene. Yes, of course. I just needed some shade. She forced a smile and failed. Aurnach plucked a small yellow wildflower and tucked it behind her ear. The gesture sparked an intimate memory, one that still burned beneath her skin. He brushed her cheek with the back of his fingers, a barely there touch. I saw you talking to your uncle. She tensed under his touch. Yes. He seemed angry. He was. She clenched her fists. There was a truth hiding behind that brittle calm. Did he threaten you? It's not that, she said, placing a light hand on his arm. But her eyes told another story. There was a wall between them now, one that hadn't been there before. You don't want to tell me? She looked away. He wants guarantees. That our engagement will end in marriage. I can't give him that. The accusation wasn't direct, but it struck him all the same. Your uncle seems a little too invested in this engagement. Shouldn't he be? Thanks to him, I'm here. And it's our marriage that's keeping the peace, isn't it? Aurnach nodded, though he doubted peace was all Farquhar was after. Have you told him I plan to break it off? No. But he'll find out soon enough. A knot tightened in his throat. He wanted to erase the sorrow from her face, but he couldn't offer empty promises. I don't trust him, Liobhan. And it's hard to trust you when you keep things from me. Is there something I shouldn't know? She looked at him, wounded, her eyes shining. After everything we've shared, you can still ask me that. After I gave you everything, without even asking your name. He swallowed hard. I know. And I do value it. But I'm the laird. I have to ask. Don't you know I could never betray you? Her eyes searched his, wide and fragile. And something in her gave way. Don't you see I wish everything were different? That just looking at you tells me I want no one else? That it breaks me to think of you with another, in your bed, in your life? Aurnach felt those words steal the air from his lungs. But he couldn't say what she needed to hear. Liobhan. She took a step back. Let me say it. You wanted the truth, here it is. I won't pretend anymore. I love you, Aurnach MacInnes. With everything I am. And I don't regret it. He stood still. Her words struck him like a brand to the chest. He wished he could hold her, promise her something else. But he knew what he owed his people. He knew what his name meant. He wiped away a tear with his thumb. Ah, sweet girl. That's all you can say. He found no words. Not without letting everything fall apart. What you feel honors me. But maybe it would be easier if you didn't love me. She lowered her gaze. Then with a steady voice replied. Easier, yes. But not better. I'll never regret loving you. And you can trust me. I'd never betray you. And he believed her. He couldn't not. Then let's not speak of this again. She nodded. Aurnach pulled her close and kissed her gently. She responded soft, as if forgiving him. With her lips, she told him what he couldn't bring himself to say. When they parted, he kissed her forehead. Let's not let Farquhar ruin the day. All right. She smiled. But the weight of duty settled back into place, familiar and cold. He thought of Aurnach, of the MacInnes, of peace. An alliance. A seed of possibility planted itself in his mind. He didn't yet know what shape it would take. He wrapped an arm around her shoulders, and they walked back together. Liobhan's words echoed within him, indelible. Chapter 22. Between loyalty and desire, only the heart chooses. A kiss for good luck. Aurnach's warm, calloused hands lifted her easily, pulling her firmly against his body, solid as stone. Liobhan gave a quiet laugh, as she found his sparkling eyes so close to hers. You don't need luck, Aurnach MacInnes. You've won nearly everything. Only the log remains. Looks like the MacInnes will claim victory again. And does that make you happy? He asked, mock disheartened like a knight wounded by his lady's disapproval. You know it does. Though I think you enjoy the girls' applause a bit too much. Maybe I should teach you a little humility. I could kiss a MacLean. You'll do no such thing if you want me to live to see another dawn, he murmured against her ear. His breath sent a shiver through her. Who's up now? He laughed softly beside her neck, and she felt her skin prickle. His voice came again, gentler. Then kiss me. Not for luck but as a favor, like the knights who bore their ladies' colours. Liobhan rose on her toes, bracing herself against his arms, and brushed his lips with a brief, nearly chaste kiss. That's not quite what I had in mind, he said, raising an eyebrow. But with such a crowd and so little time, I'll have to make do for now. He turned with a smile, and walked off toward the gathered group for the caber toss. Liobhan watched him go, her chest warm, full of pride and a longing that burned through her. Despite everything that weighed on them, something undeniable was growing between them. Since that difficult conversation 2 days earlier, he hadn't brought it up again. He had accepted her word without pressing. And though Liobhan hadn't meant to tell him she loved him, the words had slipped out. He hadn't answered. But since then, she often caught him looking at her with tenderness. She was still lost in thought when Ian's voice pulled her back. "Hey Liobhan. You're going to miss the show." "Oh, I didn't realize it had started." She let him guide her toward the field. "You've done well in the games, Ian. Aren't you competing in the caber toss?" "No, Angus is better. But even he doesn't stand much chance against your Aurnach. It's a performance fit for the bards." He fell silent for a moment before asking, "Is everything all right?" The question carried more weight than it seemed. Liobhan cast a quick glance around before answering. "No one nearby." She nodded, honest. "As well as can be expected. It's just, you look happy. With him. I was wondering if that's changed the way you think." She looked at him, alarmed, and he gently took her hand. "Don't worry. I won't say anything. But if you need to talk, I'm here." Liobhan lowered her gaze, touched. Ian wasn't pressing her, only listening. "I'm not sure what I should do. But our uncle doesn't leave much room. There are always options. You just have to find the one that makes you happy. And I've never seen you like this, more yourself. Freer." "I never was in Dunstaffnage," she said softly. He nodded. Nothing more needed to be said. "I've changed," she added. "Aurnach is a true friend." Ian smiled, more at ease. "Do you remember our uncle's face when he saw Aurnach without the eye patch? What he did with that procession was cruel mockery, but he looked like a toad beside a fairy princess." Liobhan chuckled under her breath. "He looked like he'd swallowed his tongue." "Anyway," Ian went on, "I don't envy your position. You're going to anger someone powerful, no matter what you choose. But I'll admit, Aurnach has impressed me. He's a strong laird, and his clan respects him. Just be careful with our uncle. Father thinks Farquhar has other plans." "What kind of plans?" "He suspects he might be allying with the MacRae, despite everything he's promised. And he blames himself for what happened to you. He thinks it was his fault." "Why?" "He told Farquhar about your letter. The one that mentioned MacInnes was still in Edinburgh. He believes Farquhar passed that on to MacRae." Liobhan struggled to process it. Was that why Aurnach had questioned her? A single comment, and betrayal. "I can't believe it," she whispered. "The hatred MacRae holds for us runs deep. And if Farquhar's lost control of that alliance, there's no stopping it." The name MacRae sent a chill through her blood. She'd seen him watching her these past days, with the same dead eyes as his fallen son. But his held something more, a promise of vengeance. "Father's looking for another alliance," Ian said. "He might accept help from MacInnes." "Would he really?" "I think so. Can you get Aurnach to offer it?" "I can try." They shared a smile. For the first time, Liobhan felt the path opening. There were still obstacles, but something had changed. "Don't tell him anything yet. I'll write as soon as I know for sure." "Good luck, Liobhan. I hope it works out. For all of us, but especially for you." The crowd began to cheer, drowning out his last words. But Liobhan didn't mind. For the first time in days, she felt like she could breathe freely. "I've come for what's mine." Long past midnight, Aurnach climbed the spiral stairs to his chambers. The celebration for the victory still roared below, echoes of joy that barely touched his mood. There was another battle that mattered more. He opened the door and stepped inside. Closed it behind him with a firm motion. Leaning against the frame, arms crossed, a shadow of a smile pulled at his mouth. Liobhan was seated at the table, gathering her hair with her fingers. She turned slowly, studying him with a mix of surprise and something far more dangerous. In the flickering candlelight, her hair gleamed like molten fire over bare shoulders. The linen shirt she wore looked almost like an afterthought. Aurnach felt his body tense but didn't move, just watched her. She stood tilting her head. "Another victory?" she asked, with a smile that betrayed her modest tone. "A fleeting kiss isn't enough spoils," he said, stepping forward. She stepped back, light as a sigh, circling the bed. For a moment, a bare leg slipped free of the linen. Aurnach swallowed hard. "Don't play with me, Liobhan," he said, his voice rougher than he intended. "I thought you liked games. You're good at winning." They moved around the bed like pieces on a board. Every glance, every smile carried an edge. At last he feinted, and when she tried to dodge, he caught her in a smooth, sure leap. He landed over her with no weight, a laugh caught in his throat. "Captured." Liobhan twisted beneath him, laughing between gasps, not truly resisting. Her eyes sparkled, lit by more than the chase. "Do you surrender?" "Never," she whispered, and that single word made him lose his footing. He pinned her wrists gently, leaning in to kiss her. It was slow, deep, like a promise neither dared name. When he raised a hand to touch her, he felt her shiver beneath his fingers. Every response surprised him, like it was the first time. Like every touch was brand new. "Now." She looked at him calmly, lips wet, eyes dark with desire. "You're a barbarian, Aurnach MacInnes. Is that a yes?" She didn't answer, but her body softened beneath him, yielding. He touched her with reverence, his fingers trailing slowly, listening to the sighs escaping her throat. When his tongue met her body arched toward him with something close to fury. Her moans were soft, but to Aurnach they were thunder in his chest. Afterward, when she lay spent, he helped her remove the shirt. He undressed quickly, almost desperately, and lay beside her, taking her in. Her beauty was more than flesh, it was her stillness, the fire in her spirit, the honesty of her desire. "What do you want from me?" she asked, drawing lazy circles on his stomach. Her hand hovered dangerously close to his erection, never quite touching. He closed his eyes. "Surprise me." And she did. Her mouth traveled down his body, unhurried. He held his breath. When her tongue touched him for the first time, Aurnach thought the whole world might collapse into that single point of contact. He looked at her, caught in her eyes in the quiet devotion with which she worshipped him. "Do you surrender?" she whispered. "I surrender," he managed, breathless. Then she took him. Gently at first, then with confidence, like she knew exactly what she was doing. He couldn't last long. When he lifted her above him, when he entered her, it felt like something ancient and deep stirred awake between them. Their bodies met with fierce urgency, but also with tenderness. She moved over him with a mix of innocence and power, and Aurnach knew he was lost. When she unraveled in his arms, he followed, emptied of everything. It wasn't just pleasure. It was surrender. And then silence. He held her still, as if letting go would break something vital. The sweat on his brow cooled slowly. It took him a moment to realize what he'd done. He hadn't held back. Not with her. He looked at her, fear creeping in. "I'm sorry." Liobhan pressed a finger to his lips. "Don't ruin it," she said softly, her eyes asking for quiet more than forgiveness. They said nothing else. They didn't need to. Both knew that by dawn nothing would have changed. The world would still be just as merciless. But Aurnach held her tightly, as if he could still shield her from it all. And as she drifted to sleep, his mind returned to the thought that had haunted him for days. Losing her wasn't an option. Not this time. Not with her. Aurnach had learned to hold back. Not because he had loved and lost, but because he had never allowed himself to fully love. He had known desire, yes, and the fleeting games that loneliness and war permit. Love to him had been a truce, not a promise. Since then, he had stood firm in his code of honor, choosing distance over vulnerability. But Liobhan wasn't a truce. She wasn't easily disarmed or dismissed. She reminded him that real love didn't always come as shelter. Sometimes it arrived as a challenge. As for Liobhan, she had come to Dun Coran with a heart torn between loyalty and duty, between the desire to save her people and the fear of losing herself in the process. From a young age she had learned that love had to be earned, that she had to deserve it. Be useful. Be good. Be enough. That's why when she looked at Aurnach, so guarded, so bound to his code of honor and his wounds, she felt that if she could just crack him open, she might find in his reflection something like love. But every attempt seemed to collide with a wall, a suspicion, an absence, a silence. And yet her heart, stubborn as ever, kept returning, as if it knew nothing else but to wait, to dream, to try, to ache. Chapter 23. Mull, spring of 1602. The eternal flame, only love can save her from the fire. By late afternoon, Liobhan stifled a yawn discreetly. It had been a long day, after a night far too short. She glanced sideways at the man riding beside her. Fortunately, Aurnach seemed absorbed in conversation with Caermann and Douglas. Shifting her position in the saddle, she held back a grimace. It had been months since she'd ridden for so long, and her body was making sure she remembered. They had gone far beyond the planned distance, 6 leagues past Bracadale, nearly to Sligachan, before turning back. The wild beauty of the landscape had drawn them on. The heather swayed in shades of green and violet beneath the wind, and the air smelled of promise and salt. Liobhan was glad to be away from Duncoran, but exhaustion had settled deep in her bones. Aurnach had warned her it would be a demanding journey, especially after the victory celebration. But she had insisted on joining them, on joining him as they escorted their people back south. Now she regretted not listening. Not that she'd admit it. She knew exactly what he would say if he heard her complain, "I told you so." And he'd be right. He knew her, sometimes better than she understood herself. Her thoughts drifted, inevitably, to the night before. Despite everything they'd shared over the past months, the memory still managed to bring color to her cheeks. He hadn't held back. Neither had she. She gripped the reins tighter, as if she could cling to something she still didn't dare name, the possibility of a future. The wind loosened a strand of hair, which clung to her cheek in the warm breeze. She brushed it away with irritation. The sun was dipping low, gilding the horizon as they skirted the forest, and the village came into view in the distance. She was grateful for the detour. The memory of the attack in the woods still weighed on her. She wondered if Aurnach sensed it, if he had chosen this route for her. She didn't notice him watching her until she heard his voice. Tired? She straightened with dignity. Not at all. Stubborn girl, he chuckled. Don't worry, we're almost there. Will we arrive before nightfall? Branath will let us know. Then we'll pick up the pace. They were riding slowly, out of caution. Branath and a few men had gone ahead to scout the terrain. After the truce, Aurnach didn't trust the MacRae. Neither did Liobhan. Douglas had followed them that same morning, making sure they were leaving Ross of Mull. But Aurnach suspected more. He kept a close eye on Farquhar, who was traveling with Liobhan's family to Kilchurn, where they would sail to the Morar Peninsula. The scent of the sea was growing stronger. Soon they would reach the Berlin that would carry them back to Duncoran. Around them, the men were laughing, still euphoric from the victory. Liobhan, in contrast, felt more alert than ever. Aurnach, though silent, never stopped scanning the surroundings. The tension in his shoulders gave him away. Don't you like the tales of your legendary prowess? She teased. He didn't answer. His brow furrowed. Branath should have returned by now. A chill swept through Liobhan. Before she could speak, the thunder of hooves broke through the trees. Branath emerged, covered in blood. The MacRae, he gasped. 20 of them. They were waiting at the boats. Now they're coming this way. But Douglas saw them cross the estuary. It was a ruse, Aurnach murmured. They left men behind to ambush us. He was already shouting orders. Liobhan, stay with Caermann. He'll get you out of here. I don't want to leave you. Do as I say. There's no time. The sound of horses drawing near heightened the urgency. Aurnach turned to Caerman. "Take her. We'll meet at the boats. And remember what I entrusted to you." Caerman nodded. With a firm gesture he turned his horse. "Be careful," Liobhan whispered. They looked at each other. It lasted only a second, but the weight of all left unsaid sent a shiver through her. "Of course, girl. Now go." As she followed him, the whistle of an arrow sliced through the air. The MacRaes appeared on top of the hill. Liobhan barely had time to look back. Aurnach and his men were charging at the enemy. Her heart clenched. She should have kissed him, told him she loved him. But it was too late. The war cries of the MacInnes echoed behind her. Caerman pushed her toward the forest. The sun vanished. The shadows of the trees closed around her, stirring memories she didn't want to relive. A voice behind her made her turn. "Caerman. Behind you." It was Aurnach. He had come. But the joy lasted only a breath. An arrow whistled through the trees. Aurnach and Caerman faced the pursuers with lethal coordination. But just as Aurnach struck down the last man, a lone arrow found its mark in his abdomen. Liobhan saw him collapse against his horse. The deep red bloomed across his liny crotch like a terrible flower. Something broke inside her. No. Aurnach raised his head. He was still alive. Barely. There must have been another group, he managed. Use the old passage. Quickly. Caerman took the reins and turned to Liobhan. "We have to get him to Dun Coran or he'll die. Move." She nodded, speechless. The tears stole her breath. She followed Caerman through the forest at full gallop. The horses panting, the swish of branches, the pounding of her heart in her ears. Aurnach's head bobbed, unconscious. "I can't lose him." The MacRae shouts thundered behind them. "Almost there," Caerman shouted. They veered toward the coast, down a narrow hidden path. In the distance, the castle loomed over the cliff, barely 100 feet away. So close. So far. "Where are we going?" "Follow me." They entered a passageway camouflaged among the brush. Damp darkness enveloped them. Liobhan could barely see. Only the hoofbeats, the labored breathing of the horses. A tunnel of stone opened before them, wet and cold. Caerman looked at her, and pressed a finger to his lips. Silence. Liobhan swallowed hard. The worst was not yet over. But Aurnach was alive. And as long as he lived, she would not give up. When they finally stopped, Caerman dismounted quickly. "We're safe. For now. The horses can't go any farther. I need your help with Aurnach." Liobhan didn't wait for him to come closer. She jumped to the ground, her legs shaking, and ran to the figure slumped over the saddle. At her touch, Aurnach opened his eyes and gave her a grimace that barely passed for a smile. "Aurnach," she whispered, as if saying his name could tether him to the world. "We're almost there. Just hold on a little longer." She held him with both hands, her grip reverent. His forehead was damp and cold. The thick, acrid scent of blood filled her throat. She leaned in, avoiding the arrow protruding from his side, and brushed his forehead with her lips. She couldn't lose him now, not when she was only beginning to know him. "Help me get him down," she said without looking at Caerman. Together, they lowered him. Aurnach drifted in and out of consciousness, and though his feet barely touched the ground, every jolt of pain that rippled through him was a brutal reminder of how fragile he'd become. They moved slowly, clinging to his wounded body like a secret. The path beneath them was damp, the stones slick underfoot. "Where are we?" she asked softly. "An old tunnel, dug by our Norse ancestors. Few know it exists. Aurnach and I, and now you." Liobhan nodded, not daring to thank him for the trust. It was one more burden, and she already carried enough. She still hated keeping things from her family. Aurnach's muscles tensed beside her. His breath was faint. Liobhan could feel her own strength failing, but she kept going. She thought of only one thing: he needs me. When she thought she couldn't take another step, Cairman stopped. This is it. He straightened with effort, panting. All around them was rock and shadow. I don't see. Above. She looked up. In the ceiling, a barely visible trapdoor. I'll go first. Then you pass Aurnach to me. Carefully. On the other side, a stairway leads straight to the kitchens. She nodded, swallowing the questions she didn't want answered. She'd explored every corner of the castle, never imagined something like this could be so close. That smell. Is that roasted meat? The kitchens. An old MacInnes with a taste for cruelty made sure the smell from the spit drifted down into the dungeons. Liobhan suppressed a shiver. She knew that stone pit, dark and bottomless. She dreamt of it. Feared it. What if we can't lift him? Then I'll find help. But he wouldn't want anyone else to see this. They didn't need help. Between the two of them, they got him up. Aurnach opened his eyes briefly to assist them, clinging to life with staggering determination. In the kitchen, Cairman scanned the space in silence and, seeing it clear, called out. Chaos arrived quickly. Liobhan didn't leave his side. Everything blurred, rushing hands, a needle, a familiar voice, Deirdre whispering prayers as the arrow was pulled free. Then nothing. The room was dim, lit only by the moon filtering through the mist. Liobhan sat beside the bed, unmoving. She had made everyone else leave. She wanted to be alone with him. Aurnach's face was ashen except for his cheeks flushed with fever. The fact he still breathed seemed an act of pure will. Liobhan's heart beat with the ancient fear of someone sensing something beloved slipping away. She dabbed his forehead with a cold cloth. She needed to do something, anything. She hated the helplessness of waiting. Then Aurnach's lashes fluttered. Where? He murmured, his voice broken. Home. You're safe, she whispered, touching his hand. Don't speak. He shook his head slightly, uneasy. Find Cairman. He needs to know something important. She understood. He thinks he's going to die. The certainty pierced her like a blade. I'll bring him right away. She found him asleep, worn out. She had to shake him. Aurnach needs you. Says it's important. They went up together. She left them alone, waiting outside. She wanted to respect their privacy. But curiosity and worry got the better of her. She approached the half-open door. A narrow sliver of light escaped through the crack. Reach behind the headboard. Feels like a carving, Aurnach was saying. Liobhan held her breath. She realized too late what she was witnessing. The flag. The famed banner of the eternal flame. It was disappointingly plain. Red-yellow worn. A rag at first glance. And yet it was what everyone sought. He kept it here, under his bed, she thought with a shiver. He'd slept on it. When Cairman came out, Liobhan had already stepped away. She pretended not to have seen anything. Aurnach wants to speak with you. She entered without a word. His eyes were closed, but as soon as he sensed her, he opened them. He smiled. I'm sorry, he said. There's nothing to apologize for, she replied, taking his hand. And you're not going to die. I won't allow it. Liobhan. His voice was barely a thread. I need you to know what you feel. I feel it too. She stared at him, breathless. What do you mean? That I love you. In a way I never thought possible. Time stopped. What she had feared and longed for came crashing down all at once, uncontrollable. She cried. Then why didn't you say so before? I thought it would make it harder to let you go. She wanted to speak, to tell him everything. But she swallowed the words. Not now. Not like this. He stroked her cheek. I love you too, she said. And I always will. She leaned toward him and rested her forehead in his hand. It was the most beautiful and terrible moment of her life. Aurnach's breathing was labored, but his expression was peaceful. He closed his eyes and slept. Chapter 24. The Seafarer, Old English Poem. The paths of exile stretch endlessly. The echoes of the bagpipes drifted through the corridors like an ancient lament. In every note trembled the sorrow of an entire clan, and in Murdo Strathern's voice, hoarse from sleepless nights and stubborn hope, pulsed a prayer. My pipes cry beneath the grey sky, and the echo answers from the endless vale. My land calls me, but I cannot return. The wind takes me, and I know not where. For days the castle seemed suspended in a time without hours. Days of fever, of cold sweats and ragged breaths. Days when Liobhan begged God to take him. Days when she begged him not to. But he took no one. Aurnach survived. Against all logic, his body held out and overcame the infection. When he finally opened his eyes, and his clear, steady blue gaze met hers, Liobhan felt something in her chest break and mend at once. Go rest. Now, he commanded, his voice strong, unmistakable. She never thought hearing that unyielding voice would make her so happy. She didn't obey. Instead, she laid her head on the rough bedspread and cried silently. He stroked her hair once briefly like a sigh. Then he was himself again, and sent her off to sleep with his usual firmness. Liobhan left without argument, bone-tired. In the weeks that followed, she cared for him with devotion. But the joy of seeing him recover was shadowed by a dull fear. Aurnach hadn't spoken of the future. Rejection still loomed. Liobhan feared silence more than any word. She knew Farquhar wouldn't wait forever. If she didn't hand over the banner, he would expose her betrayal. Everything hung by a thread. What if Aurnach decided to send her away before she could tell him the truth? She'd had her chance that night at his bedside when death had seemed certain. But she hadn't been able to. Her love was too new, too fragile. Too many forces conspired to pull them apart. How could she trust something so uncertain? She needed time. To convince the Queen. To find a way out. To face Farquhar without betraying Aurnach. As she prayed, Caedra walked in wrapped in a silk shawl. That's when she saw it, the same fabric, the same colors. It was the shawl she had mistaken for the banner. And then the idea, she would send Farquhar the shawl instead of the banner. If his spy came in person to claim it, she'd switch them at the last moment. It was just a trick. But it might be enough. She'd buy time. Maybe enough for Aurnach to speak the vows that would make their bond unbreakable. The deception weighed on her, but she told herself it was necessary. In the end, everything would work out. Or so she wanted to believe. Nearly a month after the attack, when Aurnach was finally resuming his duties, Liobhan sat down to write. A letter to her uncle. Another to the Queen. As she moved some papers, she found a sheet unsigned. She recognized Aurnach's handwriting. A name stood out among the lines, Count of Ardmore. She read with a knot in her stomach, I am recovered. I must see you to discuss the alliance. He was still planning to marry Elspeth MacLean. The blow was sharp. Liobhan closed her eyes, took a deep breath, and folded the letter without creasing it. She set it aside as if she hadn't read it, and began to write her own. Now more than ever she needed time. Aurnach descended to the library slowly. Every step reminded him he wasn't fully recovered. Liobhan had forbidden him from leaving the tower, but refusing to hold the council in his chamber would have been worse. His men were already waiting. He was glad to see Branneth looking well. He had saved his life by warning him of the ambush. Others hadn't been so lucky. But the MacRae were no longer what occupied his thoughts. It's a good plan, said Caerman. But will the king agree? James avoids taking sides, Aurnach replied. But if Aurnach MacInnes is offered as part of Liobhan's dowry, he won't have to choose between Farquhar and us. It will be a clean solution. Farquhar won't accept it, said Branneth. It doesn't matter, said Aurnach. He was the one who proposed the marriage. In a royal match, a dowry is assumed. And Ardmore? Braniff interjected. Breaking with him could cost you dearly. I'll make amends. Liobhan has influence at court. Her connection to the Queen is worth as much as the alliance with Ardmore. Douglas nodded. She was well regarded at court. The king trusted her. The Queen even more. I've written to them both, said Aurnach. And to Ardmore. Caerman shook his head but didn't argue. The risk was clear. If the king refused, they'd lose Aurnach. Aurnach knew it. But he also knew he couldn't lose Liobhan. He had made his choice. Now he had to make sure that choice didn't destroy his clan. He couldn't go on. He needed to return to bed. Liobhan had been right. Not that he planned to admit it. He knew her unease ran deeper than concern for his health. And he knew he wouldn't be able to give her the reassurance she craved until the king's reply arrived. Then and only then could he smooth that crease of worry that shadowed her brow. Soon, he told himself. Aurnach. Was it possible to love someone and still doubt her? To feel both betrayal and tenderness at once? He didn't know, but he was living it. He had thought love should be clear, like honor. But Liobhan had taught him love could also be contradiction, and that truly loving meant embracing the unknown. Sometimes forgiveness wasn't for the other person, it was for yourself. Because to love was also to stop waging war against what you feel. Chapter 25. The love between them wasn't easy. It didn't follow rules or timing. It was human in its need and divine in its drive. A love that asked for no guarantees but demanded truth. She loved him with a faith that couldn't be explained, a faith that hurt but also lit her from within. He, with the caution of someone who had lost too much, loved in silences, in restrained presence, with the fury of someone who didn't know how to hold on to what he longed for. Deep down they both wanted the same thing, a love that wouldn't ask them to betray themselves. A love that could hold them in their fullness, with their fears, their flaws, and their fire. Because to love in the end wasn't just to feel. It was also to choose. And neither of them was fully ready, but neither was willing to fully let go. The morning was clear and serene, with that unbelievable shade of blue June sometimes grants as a reward for the long months of rain. Aurnach fastened his belt in front of the window, his body still marked by convalescence. Liobhan watched him from the doorway, uneasy. A distant clamor rose from the courtyard. Aurnach smiled. "Are you sure you're ready to train again?" asked Liobhan. "It hasn't even been 2 months since the wound." He laughed, light-hearted. "Compared to putting up with you and Urchena, sparring is a break. And thank heaven Kaedra had other matters to attend to, or I'd have died from an overdose of tea and scolding." "Ungrateful." She crossed her arms in mock indignation. "The only reason we let you move was because we knew you'd do it anyway, out of sheer stubbornness. Already forgotten last month's fever?" "I remember. But I also remember that last night, you didn't seem to doubt my recovery." The blush betrayed her before she could stop it. Her body still felt wrapped in the embers of the night before. He saw it and came closer, taking her in that mix of urgency and tenderness that still unraveled her. The kiss wasn't gentle. It wasn't a caress, it was a silent declaration of restrained desire. She responded without thinking, her body recognizing his. But Caerman's voice from the courtyard pulled them back to the world. "Are you coming or not?" They parted laughing, still breathless. "Later," she murmured. "Tonight we finish what we started. Now go before they catch you for real." Aurnach kissed her forehead with a gesture that was a promise and left. Liobhan followed him with her eyes, his steady stride, his straight back, pride untouched. Just 2 months ago she'd thought she'd lose him. And now he was himself again. Or almost. She sat on the edge of the bed, breathing deeply. The nausea returned, as it had been for days. She closed her eyes, held back the wave. It was now or never. She waited until silence ruled the hallway before stepping out. She moved carefully, without a sound. Soon she found the mechanism Aurnach had described, the wood carving, the hidden knob. The box was heavier than she'd expected. With effort, she placed it on the bed and pressed the insignia. The lock gave with a dry click. The banner was there. Fold upon fold, old silk with the scent of dust and confinement. Liobhan unfolded it with reverent hands. There were no flashes, no omens. Just a piece of history, fragile and real. She took Kaidra's shawl and held it up to the light. The breeze stirred both fabrics, making them dance like sisters. They were nearly identical. The shawl was just a bit darker, less worn, but the pattern was exact. It could work. She stored the banner with the same care, returned the box to its hiding place, and turned to close the chest where she had hidden the shawl. Then she heard the voice. "What are you doing?" The world stopped. She knew that tone, that cadence. She turned slowly. Her gaze met his, steady and wounded. He had seen enough. Chapter 26. Ulysses, Alfred Lord Tennyson. To strive, to seek, to find, and not to yield. Aurnach was standing in the doorway, motionless, watching as Liobhan put the shawl back into her chest. For a moment, the world seemed to hold its breath. He didn't understand what he was seeing. Or didn't want to. "Aurnach," she whispered, startled. "You're back earlier than I expected. I thought you were with your men." She approached quickly, raising her arms toward him, but he didn't move. Did something happen? He didn't answer immediately. His voice, when he finally spoke, sounded strange, as if it came from very far away. "I saw something in the window." And it was true. He had seen the shawl. The same pattern he knew well. The one that shouldn't have been there. Silence thickened between them. Something inside him cracked, though he didn't yet know exactly what. He looked at her, as if trying to recognize the woman who, only an hour ago, had been in his arms. That mouth, those eyes now looking at him with fear, had they always lied? The answer hit like a blunt blow, yes. It had all been a farce. "How could you?" He whispered first, with disbelief that quickly gave way to a burst of fury. "How could you?" He pushed her aside. She stumbled but didn't fall. "It's not what you think," she said in a trembling voice. "I can explain." "Explain." He spat the word like it burned in his mouth. "You spied on me when I was speaking with Cairman. You knew where the banner was. There's no other explanation." Her silence was more eloquent than any confession. Every past suspicion came crashing back like a tidal wave. The rushed agreement, her presence in the most unexpected places, the subtle questions, the provocative clothing, the insistence on sharing his bed without promises. It all fit. It had all been a strategy. "You never loved me," he said bitterly. "You just wanted the banner." She opened her mouth, but no sound came. He went on. "You used me. You made me believe." His voice cracked and he clenched his fist so tightly his knuckles turned white. "I chose a woman over my duty. I broke the alliance with Ardmore. For you. And this is how you repay me." The pain was physical, piercing. He couldn't remember ever feeling anything like it. And he hated it. Hated that he still wanted to touch her. "I trusted you," he said, and his voice was barely a whisper that turned into thunder a second later. "And you betrayed me." He grabbed her by the arms. Liobhan froze under his hands. "You're working with your uncle. You came here with a purpose. And the trial marriage was just a way in." He saw the slight tremble of her chin and took it as confirmation. "It's all been a lie." "No, Aurnach. Not everything." Her voice was low, pleading. "At first, yes, but later. I swear I..." "Don't swear anything." He let her go with a sharp motion. "I should send you dressed like a whore to Farquhar. I'm sure he'd appreciate the irony." "You don't understand." Liobhan ran to the chest and pulled out Kaidra's shawl. It wasn't the banner. I was only going to send this. I wanted to deceive him, not you. He looked at the fabric, saw the difference. But it wasn't enough. You could have changed your mind at any time. You could have taken the real one. How am I supposed to trust you now? I didn't mean to spy. It was a coincidence. I heard voices. And as for the rest. She straightened, her voice steadier. You'll have to believe me. I love you, Aurnach. I'd never hurt you. He laughed, dry, humorless. Believe you? After all this? I don't want to see you again. You're leaving today. His words knocked the air from her lungs. You can't say that, she murmured, eyes full of tears. Not after everything we've been through. What we had was desire, Liobhan. Don't confuse it with anything else. Your beauty, your body, that's what drew me in. Farquhar chose well. You were just a distraction. And I was already tired of you, even before this. She felt the ground vanish beneath her. Every word was a knife. But she didn't give up. Do what you want with me. But listen, I helped my uncle because I wanted to protect my father. I felt trapped. I thought I could manage it, that I had it under control. But then, I met you. Aurnach stepped out of her reach. There was a time to tell me all that. It's past. I warned you I wouldn't tolerate betrayal. And now you know. He looked into her eyes. She saw it clearly, there was nothing left. He had shut the door from the inside. You're dead to me. Liobhan stood still. She didn't cry. Didn't protest. She just watched as he walked away, each of his steps erasing something of what they had been. When the door closed, the sound felt like it sealed a fate. Then the sobs came, dry and hoarse, torn from the depths. She collapsed beside the chest, beside the shawl that had never been a banner, with the certainty that she had just lost everything. My poor girl, Kaidra whispered at last, when Liobhan, trembling, managed to tell her what had happened between sobs. There was no comfort to offer. No old or wise words that could undo what had been done. Kaidra gently lifted her face and wiped away her tears with her fingers. I know it's hard, but right now the best thing is for you to leave, just as Aurnach ordered. He's wounded, Liobhan. And not only in his heart. His pride, his honor in front of his people, everything has been laid bare. Only time can temper that wound. You need it too, to think about how to make him listen again. Liobhan didn't answer. She knew it. But leaving felt unbearable. Everything she loved was here. Even Kaidra. The woman seemed to read her thoughts. I could go with you. Sumas would understand. Liobhan took her hands, moved. Dear Kaidra. Your place is here. This was my decision, and I knew the risks when I accepted my uncle's game. What I didn't imagine was how much I had to lose. Kaidra embraced her tightly, and in that familiar refuge, Liobhan finally broke. She wept as only someone does when something essential shatters. Until she was empty. Then, overwhelmed by anguish, she vomited under her nurse's silent gaze. Time seemed to slip away. When she sat up, the window was stained with the last light of the day. Dark clouds piled over the sea, and the sun sank behind the cliffs of Gribben, slow and dim. Kaidra was gathering clothes, folding cloaks, organizing without asking. Liobhan didn't move. She waited, not knowing for what. A knock on the door snapped her from her trance. It wasn't a nightmare. Kaidra got up and opened it, and there stood Branneth, his face expressionless. He had come to escort her. From the room that was no longer hers. Liobhan looked around. The unmade bed, the lingering scent of the previous night. Every corner was an open wound. She closed her eyes. Then took the belongings Kaidra had packed for her, and left without looking back. The Norseman said nothing, as he led her down the hallway, down the sea stair to the waiting boat. Liobhan searched the mist for a familiar figure. Aurnach wasn't there. Neither were Caerman nor Urchenna. No one. She felt Caedra's warm hand on her arm. I'm sure they would have come if they knew you were leaving. I don't know. But if you see them, you'll tell them yourself when you come back, Caedra interrupted firmly. Liobhan knew she only wanted to comfort her. They both understood how unlikely a return was. Not after this. She had betrayed the only trust Aurnach had given her. The tears threatened again. Caedra embraced her once more, with a tenderness that bordered on desperation. Branneth cleared his throat. It was time. Be happy, Caedra. Sumas and his daughters need you. Don't worry about me, Liobhan said, trying to smile. I'm stronger than I seem. She kissed her cheek and stepped onto the berlin. A low mist twined with the moonlight. Liobhan raised a silent hand to Caedra, who stood by the stair, farther and farther away. The oar struck the water with a slow, hollow rhythm. No one spoke. The men who had laughed with her a day before now avoided her. Among the MacInnes clan, Liobhan was alone. She curled under her cloak, hiding her face. The journey was taking her back to the beginning. Fate had closed the circle. They had started as enemies, and it seemed that was how they would end. One last time she looked up at the castle. The fairy tower stood silhouetted in the mist. Her eyes fixed on that window. The window where, only yesterday, she had been happy. A shadow moved away from the glass. Her heart jumped. Give me a sign. Just one. She didn't blink. She stayed still, waiting. Pleading with all her soul for something, anything. Nothing. The mist swallowed the tower. And the dream vanished with it. Her heart ached as if it had cracked. A part of her was left behind, locked within the gray walls of a castle she had come to love. Chapter 27. Between the Wind and the Fire. The creak of a door shattered the thick silence of the library. Aurnach didn't move. It had been nearly a day since Liobhan left, and so far he had managed to stay away from everyone. He knew he couldn't avoid Urchenna and Caerman forever. They entered without a word. Aurnach, sunk deep into the armchair by the fire, didn't lift his gaze. His eyes were fixed on the embers, as if he could burn the memory within them. Urchenna was the first to approach. She knelt beside him and gently took his hand. What happened, Aurnach? Why did you send her back? She asked, carefully removing the empty jug resting at his feet. I've never seen you like this. Aurnach exhaled through his nose, weary. The Uiski Bitha barely dulled the knot in his chest. What hurt most now wasn't the betrayal, it was the doubt. And everything it brought with it. He turned his face toward the fire. I went into her room, and found her with what I thought was the flag. She pretended not to see me. I confronted her. She admitted she had come under Farquhar's orders. Urchenna and Caerman exchanged a bewildered glance. They weren't the only ones who had been charmed by her. She didn't give you any explanation? Urchenna whispered. Aurnach let out a short, bitter laugh. About what? Coming into my home as a spy? Earning everyone's trust just to rob us? He paused, swallowing the bitter heat rising in his throat. Making me believe she loved me. Urchenna lowered her head. Her voice was barely a murmur. I heard something that night. Liobhan. She was speaking with Farquhar. He was threatening her, saying something about the flag. I wanted to believe it was nothing. That she'd tell you when she was ready. I'm sorry. Aurnach clenched his teeth. Another open wound. Another broken loyalty. You should have come to me, he said at last without anger. But I don't blame you. I wanted to believe in her too. Then what was it she was hiding? Caerman asked. A shawl. Caedra's. Old but similar. She said she planned to use it to trick Farquhar. And do you believe her? Aurnach didn't answer right away. That was the question eating him alive. I don't know. Maybe it doesn't matter anymore. It does matter, Aurnach said, her voice trembling with quiet conviction. Because I think she loved you. And if she told the truth, she came here because her clan needed her. Because she thought she could prove her worth. And in the end she chose not to betray us. And is that enough? Aurnach asked without looking at her. After what she did? I'm not excusing it, Aurnach replied. But I know what it means to be afraid of Farquhar. He gets what he wants, and he does it with violence. If he asked something of you, you'd know saying no isn't an option. And don't forget what Liobhan did for me. Aurnach closed his eyes. He hadn't forgotten. Then why didn't she trust me? Because she didn't know if you'd forgive her, Caerman said. And if you haven't dissolved the marriage yet, maybe she was right. Aurnach didn't respond. She lied to you, yes, said Aurnach softly. But she also loved you. He set his jaw, eyes still on the fire. Love wasn't enough. Not without trust. It's over. Caerman, who had remained silent, finally spoke. She betrayed all of us. I wouldn't have been so lenient. Aurnach nodded. Caerman turned toward the door, but before leaving he looked at his sister. Leave him, Aurnach. He needs to be alone. She didn't move right away. She leaned in, kissed Aurnach gently on the cheek. Do what you think is right. But think carefully. You may not have much time. Aurnach kept his eyes on the fire. If you don't want her, someone else will, Aurnach added before she left. The sound of the cup crushed in his hand filled the silence. Then the crash of metal shattering on the floor. The door closed behind them. Aurnach didn't move. He remained there, in the flickering firelight. Wordless. Answerless. But he had heard everything. 3 days later, from the battlements of Kilchurn, Farquhar spotted the group of riders making their way through the thick heather, advancing down the hillside like a dark stain on the damp earth. He recognized the hooded figure at once, upright on a palfrey. The cloak draped over her shoulders was one he had given her. He muttered a curse, and lazily wiped the wine from his lip. So his niece was returning. Under escort by the looks of it. She had failed. Just as he had expected. He turned away, spitting on the ground. Liobhan had proven as predictable as she was useless. A pretty face and a few promises had been enough to bend her. He shouldn't have expected anything else. Women were meant to secure alliances, bear heirs. Nothing more. That was why he hadn't staked his entire plan on her. He had other paths in motion. He smoothed his beard slowly, watching the group draw nearer. His niece knew about the hidden access beneath the cliffs of Dun Coran. The MacRaes had tried to find it, without success. But Liobhan had seen it. She would remember. Perhaps he could still extract some use from her. He would wait. The wind picked up, heavy with sea salt. Farquhar remained still, his gaze fixed on the horizon. He had expected more from his last strike against MacInnes. That wound should have ended him, but no. Not this time. His informant had spoken of an unexpected, almost miraculous recovery. He didn't believe in witchcraft, but he didn't believe in coincidences either. The flag. That cursed relic had thwarted the MacRaes' designs before. It wouldn't do so again. Magic or luck, it would end. And then everything would be his, Dun Coran, the islands, the lordship. Aurnach MacInnes would not live to stop him. Chapter 28. Whispers of the Storm. Liobhan waited for a forgiveness that never came. Reason told her he might never forgive her, but her heart, that traitor, refused to believe it. Caedra had told her to give it time. Time for the anger to fade, time for him to understand. But Liobhan felt that time was not on her side. If she waited too long, she might find that Aurnach had chosen someone else. The thought pierced her chest with that now familiar ache. It haunted her constantly. She wanted to forget, to gain distance, to let time dull the wound. But only a few days had passed since he'd sent her back, and each of them had dragged on like winter. 5 days with Farquhar in watched silence, waiting for her family to come for her. She didn't long for her father's judgment, but at least it would bring an end to the heavy tension, to her uncle's silent game. Farquhar didn't believe her. He pretended courtesy but waited, patient, for her to slip. She had told him she didn't remember how they'd reached Dun Coran after the attack. She'd faked confusion, shock. But her uncle wasn't fooled. He was planning something. She could feel it in the way he looked at her, as if he'd already drawn the lines of a trap. She spent hours at the dressing room window, staring out over the loch, her gaze drifting beyond the Quillen to the north, to where she believed Aurnach still was. She longed for a rider, a message, any sign. Nothing came. Only the echo of her own waiting. A low sound pulled her from her reverie, her stomach protesting. She'd barely eaten. The smells from the kitchen made her nauseous. But her dress now hung loosely on her frame, and she knew she had to regain her strength. If she was going to fight for Aurnach, if she still wanted to, she needed her body and her mind. Fight for him. The thought startled her. Something, just a flicker of warmth, sparked beneath the sorrow. She had to act. She couldn't keep wasting away on memories. He had to know how deeply she regretted everything. That he could understand. That he could still trust her, that he could still love her. She went down to the kitchen. Ate slowly, forcing each bite. She would think later. She would act. "Good morning, Torkal. Are you off somewhere?" Torkal, who had just stepped out of the library, flinched as if Liobhan's voice had struck him. He stumbled, and a storm of papers flew from his arms, scattering letters down the hallway. "Good morning, milady," he managed after a confused blink. Liobhan didn't correct his formality. He was flustered enough already. She knelt to help him gather the scrolls, and in the middle of the chaos her eyes landed on a familiar seal, per mare, per terrace. Her heart leapt. She didn't dare believe it. But her gaze traveled to the name on the letter. A name that left no doubt. Was this it? Was it now? With careful hands, while Torkal gathered the rest, she slipped the letter between the folds of her skirt. She handed back the rest of the messages with a smile that, for the first time in days, came easily. "Safe travels, Torkal." Her voice barely trembled. Then she climbed the stairs, holding back the urge to run. It had been less than a week since Liobhan left, and Aurnach had barely moved from the chair by the hearth. The Uiski Betha sat in his stomach like stones, yet did nothing to quench the raw fire burning in his chest. He ran a hand through his tangled hair, catching on knots he didn't remember making. The gesture made him smile without humor. A girl, no, not just any girl, had undone him. Aurnach Moore, who had always prided himself on his resolve, now found himself caught in a storm he couldn't command. He'd thought his heart long sealed off, hardened by war, loss, and politics. But Liobhan MacRae had never asked for permission to enter. And now, what was he supposed to do? Focus on duty, of course. Restore the alliance with Ardmore. Strengthen his defenses. Prepare for the inevitable, Farquhar's return with more men and more blood. But instead, he kept replaying every moment he'd shared with her. Every word, every glance. And found no rest. He had made his decision, break the engagement and send her back. Coldly, as he'd been taught. Leave no room for doubt, no cracks. That was how he'd always done things. But this time it wasn't enough. He had never known love before, and now he understood why so many feared it. It could not be torn from the soul with a gesture. Yes, she had deceived him. She had searched for the flag, she had kept secrets. But even then, even in his anger, Aurnach had begun to wonder if she had been more victim than traitor. Loyalty to one's clan was a duty he knew all too well. And she hadn't taken the flag. That mattered. And above all, one question repeated in his mind: had Liobhan at any point chosen to stay with him, despite everything? A sharp knock at the door pulled him from his thoughts. Douglas entered, wearing the solemn expression of a man afraid to disturb a silent morning. "A letter, Laird." "From the king." Aurnach blinked, his gaze clouded. It took him a few seconds to register what he held in his hands. The royal seal still gleamed. Douglas didn't move. He didn't ask. He didn't need to. With slow movements, Aurnach broke the seal and unfolded the parchment. He read. Then read again. Finally, he let out a short, joyless laugh. "It seems we have our answer." "The king?" Douglas asked cautiously. "He's approved the union. Aurnach MacInnes will pass to the MacInnes, as part of Liobhan's dowry." Douglas said nothing. He knew those words meant more than a mere political arrangement. And they came with the weight of cruel irony. "What will you do?" Aurnach rubbed his unshaven jaw. There was no easy answer. "I don't know," he said honestly. The emissary would wait, but he wasn't ready. Not yet. When Douglas left, Aurnach read again the line that had shattered something inside him. "Since, in her recent letter to the Queen, our dearest Liobhan has assured us of her happiness, and requested that Aurnach MacInnes be granted to the MacInnes, we are pleased to do so under the terms you outlined in your letter." Liobhan had spoken on his behalf. Not just to the king, but to the Queen. And she had done so, after he'd rejected her. After she left. Wasn't that a choice? Something cracked within him, soft as splintering glass. His resolve, broken by the faith that still burned in her. By that unexpected, noble, silent gesture, one that said more than 1,000 apologies. Maybe after all, not everything was lost. Maybe there was still a path back. Chapter 29. The wheel has come full circle, I am here. King Lear, Act 5, Scene 3. Shakespeare. Farquhar had underestimated her. The moment he discovered Liobhan was no longer in her room, he knew he had made a mistake. He'd expected betrayal, yes, but not so calculated. Not so brave. The news came from the lips of a maid, one of those simple souls who thought honeyed biscuits might brighten the confinement of her young lady. Upon finding the room empty, with no sign of struggle, they understood she had left by her own will. Farquhar frowned, not in surprise but in annoyance. Still, he couldn't suppress a flicker of respect. Janet's daughter had turned out to be more stubborn than she looked. A shame. If she had played her hand right, he might have found her a way out. But it was too late. She was now just another piece on the board, and one that would have to be sacrificed. His gaze drifted toward his newly arrived guest. Liobhan MacRae would settle for nothing less than Liobhan's blood. What his foolish son had tried to do to the girl might have been a tragedy of war, yes, but in politics, facts mattered less than appearances. "Go after her," Farquhar ordered, his tone cold and measured. "But move fast. And don't let her see you." "How do you know where she's going?" asked MacRae. Farquhar smiled without warmth. "Because she thinks she's in love. And when women believe they're in love, they always come back." The enemy laird nodded, confident. He was right. They would catch her. And with Aurnach dead and Duncoran in flames, what he had claimed by right would finally be his. Liobhan had lost count of the days. Her body had ached for so long the pain had become a constant murmur. Only her will, and the letter hidden against her chest, kept her upright. The proof of her uncle's betrayal, stolen with trembling hands from Torqual's study, was now her only currency. Aurnach had to see it. He had to know she had chosen. The road to Duncoran stretched longer with every step of the palfrey, but she kept going. She had to. The horse, sweating and exhausted, obeyed without complaint. She stroked its neck in gratitude. She had had nothing but him and his silence for 2 sleepless nights, riding paths she barely remembered, her lips cracked from thirst, her stomach hollow. The heat had flushed her cheeks despite the wide-brimmed hat, and dust lined her face. Every muscle ached. Her dress, though altered for riding, was still a trap of heavy cloth. But her mind didn't yield. It repeated the route, Aurnach's gestures when he sent her away, the hardened look that had hurt more than the dismissal itself. He hadn't asked her to stay. He hadn't believed her. But now she carried what he needed to destroy Farquhar. And with it, maybe, just maybe, he would look at her again. When she stopped beneath the shade of the forest, she finally saw it, the outline of Dun Coran perched on the cliff like a stone sentinel. The walls looked carved from the rock itself, cold and severe, but to Liobhan they were balm. She was close. So close. She didn't dare approach the main gate. She couldn't risk being turned away before being heard. She would use the secret entrance. Aurnach had shown her once, on a walk that now felt like a lifetime ago. The forest wrapped her in its cool shade. Every rustle among the trees made her turn, but she saw no one. Still, her instincts told her that time was not on her side. She led the horse to the slope, where heather and stone covered the hillside. There it was, the dark gap in the rock, barely visible unless you knew where to look. She paused, her forehead sticky with sweat, her chest pounding. She took a deep breath. Prayed for strength. For forgiveness. And then, without looking back, she stepped into the shadow of the tunnel. Liobhan was trembling. The cold was only part of it. Hunger, exhaustion too. But what consumed her most was the uncertainty. She had waited in the darkness of the tunnels until the murmur of the kitchens faded, then crept silently up through the secret entrance. Every step, every shadow, pushed her closer to the edge of her nerves. The fairy tower rose before her, a silhouette both familiar and distant. She wasn't afraid of getting lost, she was afraid of being turned away. What if Aurnach didn't want to see her? What if it no longer mattered? Still she went in. Not because she wasn't afraid, but because she had no other choice. The damp stone beneath her feet, the echo of her own breathing. She had just begun to climb the stairs when arms seized her from behind. She let out a strangled cry. The grip was firm, unyielding. She turned, her heart pounding, and saw him. Aurnach. For a moment, she couldn't speak. The weight of the past days, the silence, the distance crashed down on her. Tears broke free without permission. She collapsed, and he caught her. By all that's sacred, Liobhan, Aurnach's voice was a mix of anger and disbelief. What in hell are you doing here? The tone made her flinch. But the pain of being in front of him again, after so long, was also a bitter relief. She looked at him. He wasn't just beautiful, strong, unforgettable. He looked exhausted, as if he hadn't slept in days either. A flicker of hope, barely a breath, passed through her. Had he missed her? She placed her hand on his chest, trembling. The warmth of his body grounded her. She wanted to hold him, to ask for forgiveness, to explain. But the fear of rejection was stronger than her longing. Not again. Aurnach's eyes were a storm held in check. Something in his gaze made her feel seen, known. He held her tighter. Liobhan breathed in his scent, one she remembered by heart, sandalwood, skin, and something undeniably him. It hurt to have him so close. Well, he growled, trying to contain himself. Why aren't you in Kilchurn or on your way home? I had to see you. I know you said you didn't want to, but... The words tumbled out. When I helped my uncle, I didn't know what I know now. I was only thinking of protecting my clan. But then you came along. And I didn't know how to stop what I was feeling. She searched his eyes, hoping something in her would reach him. But the restrained fury was still there, like a wall of stone. You had no reason to trust me, I know. But I brought something that might prove it. And that's why you show up like this. Without an escort? His voice was pure disbelief, teetering on fury. You came alone from Farquhar. She lowered her gaze, ashamed. Liobhan, this is madness, he said, his voice cracking. Do you know what could have happened to you? Even through his anger, there was something else. A note of fear. He was still holding her, as if he didn't know whether to shake her or pull her close. She wished for the second. So much. I was desperate, she whispered. I needed to see you. I hoped you. She didn't finish. She couldn't. Something in Aurnach softened for a moment. She thought he might embrace her, that everything might fall back into place. But no. He stepped back, ran a hand through his hair, visibly shaken. You used the secret entrance. She nodded, biting her lip. I couldn't risk being turned away. I needed this. He reached out and with a gentleness that unraveled her, brushed the dust from her cheek. The gesture was so intimate, the knot in her throat tightened. What am I going to do with you, Liobhan? He whispered. Liobhan felt there was still a crack left in him. And through it, maybe, the truth could enter. While I was helping Torquil with some letters in Kilchurn, I saw one with Farquhar's seal, addressed to Owen MacAllister, Earl of Ardmore. She paused. I knew right away it was important. My uncle had spoken of his ambitions. And that letter confirmed my suspicions. Aurnach's eyes sharpened. Now he was listening. Are you saying Farquhar is in dealings with the Queen of England? Not just that. He offered his loyalty. He proposed a rebellion in the Isles. He wants to destroy the MacInnes. To claim the Isles for himself. Aurnach nodded grimly. It's even worse than I thought. To invite the English, it's madness. Treason, pure and simple. That's why I came, Liobhan said. I knew you had to know. And maybe if I did this you might believe me. Do you know what Farquhar would do if he found out you read that letter? He doesn't know, she said, though dizziness was already washing over her. Aurnach frowned. Liobhan, if this is true and the king finds out, Farquhar will be destroyed. And you rode here alone just to warn me? She nodded. She had nothing left to say. She had given everything. He looked at her, and there was no anger now. Only something deep, intense. As if he was seeing her for the first time. The tears she had fought so hard to hold back finally broke free. I don't know what to say, he murmured. Say you believe me. Aurnach lifted his hand and wiped away her tears with his thumb. His touch was tender. He was quiet for a moment, then nodded. I believe you. But he added, with regret. Though without that letter, we have no proof. Liobhan reached under her belt and pulled out a folded parchment. You mean this? She laughed softly through her tears. Then without another word she collapsed. Seeing Liobhan collapse, Aurnach felt a sudden emptiness, as if something inside him had shattered. He caught her just before she hit the ground, and for one terrifying moment, he was once again that helpless man in the forest, fearing the worst. But her breathing was steady, her body warm. She had only fainted. He lifted her gently and climbed the stairs in silence, her body no more than a sigh in his arms. Her face was pale and dirty, her tangled hair falling across her forehead like a shadow of what it once had been. And still, she was the most beautiful thing he'd seen in days. Maybe ever. He laid her down on the bed. His heart pounded in his chest, not from the effort, but from everything he couldn't yet say. He had nearly lost her. And for once politics, war, and duty all faded into the background. All that remained was her. Alive. Here. Liobhan opened her eyes slowly. What happened? She whispered, disoriented. You fainted, he replied, more gently than he thought himself capable of. She blinked, as if trying to deny the obvious. I don't faint, she murmured, and when she tried to sit up she gave up with a weary sigh. Aurnach leaned closer, his brow furrowed. How long has it been since you ate? The flush rising to her cheeks said more than any words could. I don't know, she finally admitted. He stood ready to call for help, but she grabbed his arm. No, she pleaded. Not yet. Not until you forgive me. Her voice trembled. She was breaking inside. And Aurnach felt something even harder to bear than anger, compassion, tenderness, love. I'm so sorry, Aurnach, she went on. I don't deserve your forgiveness, but I needed you to know I never meant to betray you. He pulled her into him. Her damp cheek rested against his chest, and that simple, vulnerable contact nearly undid him. "I know," he said. She looked up at him. "You do?" "Yes," he repeated, and his voice was low, almost hoarse, as if a wound had formed in his throat. He knew he would forgive her. He had known it, maybe, from the moment he let her go. If he had truly believed she was a traitor, he wouldn't have let her leave knowing all that she did. She was his, and whether he'd realized it or not, he belonged to her too. He cupped her face in his hands, making her look at him. "I forgive you for not telling me about your uncle. But promise me you'll stop listening to conversations that aren't meant for you. Whether by accident or out of curiosity." Liobhan flushed to the roots of her hair. "I promise. No more peeking through doors." And more importantly, he added softly, brushing a strand of hair from her face, "Promise me you'll never put yourself in danger like this again." She nodded, and her tears began to fall, silent. "I didn't know what else to do." "Shush," he interrupted, placing 2 fingers gently over her lips. The need to kiss her could no longer be postponed. He leaned in and kissed her with a tenderness that held days of longing, guilt, and desire. It was a soft touch, patient, barely a whisper of what was to come. And yet it was enough to break the dam. Liobhan clung to his neck with a silent plea, pressing herself against him, returning the kiss with an urgency that shattered his self-control. Sweetness gave way to need. His mouth found hers with hunger, claiming her, recognizing her. The kiss was no longer comfort, it was affirmation, belonging. A promise made through touch. He felt himself pulled into the same tide that swept her away. Touch was no longer enough, he wanted all of her, deeply, fiercely, as if only that could erase the absence and rebuild the bond they had nearly lost. But even then, he knew it wouldn't be enough. Because what burned between them was more than desire, it was love. And true love always asks for more. Chapter 30. My bounty is as boundless as the sea. My love as deep, the more I give to thee. The more I have, for both are infinite. Romeo and Juliet, Act 2, Scene 2. Shakespeare. That night they stopped looking for excuses. Intimacy sealed what words had barely begun to mend. Afterward, wrapped in each other's arms beneath the warmth of the firs, they let silence do its work. Outside the castle slept. The shadows of dawn stretched along the corridors as a deceptive calm settled over the old stones and high ceilings, heavy with ancient echoes and promises yet to be fulfilled. In the dimly lit chamber, with only the dying embers in the hearth casting a glow, sleep finally overtook them. Tangled together, as if shared warmth alone could keep the ghosts at bay. But the truce was fragile. And the night, treacherous. The cold steel at his throat was the first thing Aurnach felt as he awoke. Too late. The deep, unguarded sleep had been a rare luxury, brought on by Liobhan's presence, by the exhaustion of so many sleepless nights. But that lapse would cost them dearly. He opened his eyes. MacRae's sword pressed against his neck with terrible calm. The laird stood motionless, eyes glassy, his expression that of a man who had waited too long. He looked at them with a mix of contempt and triumph. Aurnach didn't move. But his body went instantly taut, every fiber, every muscle ready to strike if the slightest opening appeared. For now, he had to wait. "Get up, you disgrace," MacRae spat, shoving Liobhan without lifting the blade from Aurnach's throat. Aurnach longed to intervene to shield her, but one wrong move and the steel would do its work. She took a second to register what was happening. When she did, the fear stripped her to the soul. Aurnach saw it in her eyes, that silent stab of real panic. "Wake up fully, love," he murmured, voice low and tight. "Don't rush. Don't give him a reason." MacRae gave a dry, bitter laugh. "I said get up, you filthy whore." Trembling, Liobhan covered herself with the sheet as she sat up. The pale moonlight traced her silhouette with brutal intimacy. MacRae didn't move the sword from Aurnach's neck, but his eyes raked over Liobhan's body with a hunger born of hatred and twisted desire. Aurnach felt fury ignite in his chest. Not from the threat, but from that look. Then Liobhan did something unexpected. With feigned calm, she let the sheet slide slightly, exposing just enough to hold MacRae's attention completely. It was a desperate act of bravery. And it worked. Damn you, Aurnach thought. You promised not to risk yourself. But he knew in that same instant, he would have done the same for her. How did you get in here? He asked, though he already suspected the answer. I followed her, said MacRae, eyes never leaving Liobhan. I knew where she was going. It was only a matter of time. It's my fault, she whispered, turning to Aurnach. No. You couldn't have known. Aurnach kept his voice low, steady. Did you come alone? Or are there more? MacRae shrugged with false indifference. You'll find out soon enough. But first. His gaze slid back to Liobhan. Aurnach didn't need to hear more. He had to buy time. MacRae was desperate, and desperation could be turned. What do you want? The banner of the eternal flame. For starters. Aurnach barely reacted. He simply said, No. We'll see. The sword came down sharply, slicing a clean gash across Aurnach's shoulder. The pain was instant, but he didn't cry out. Liobhan did. Stop, she sobbed. Please. Bring me the banner, MacRae ordered. Or I'll cut him apart inch by inch. Aurnach thought fast. The chest. Kaidra's shawl. It would give them what they needed. Liobhan, he said, give it to him? It's in my chest. He saw the flicker of understanding in her eyes. Slowly, keeping the sheet wrapped around her, she moved to the chest. She drew out the shawl carefully, holding it as if it were sacred. Then, subtly, Aurnach signaled the fireplace. She understood. Here it is, she said firmly, taking a step toward the fire. When MacRae reached out impatiently, she threw the shawl into the flames. MacRae howled. The scream was all Aurnach needed. In one fluid motion, he launched himself from the bed, snatched a dagger from his clothes, and moved with lethal precision. MacRae barely turned the sword in time. The clash was brutal, but Aurnach didn't hesitate. With strength born of rage and love, he drove the dagger into the laird's chest. The man's eyes widened in disbelief, as if he couldn't fathom being defeated. He died without a sound, his body collapsing beside the fire. Aurnach was panting, blood pouring from his shoulder, breath ragged. Liobhan rushed to him. I thought you wouldn't make it, she whispered, trembling in his arms. I'd never let them hurt you, he said. But his heart pounded wildly, because he knew it wasn't over. MacRae hadn't come alone. The silence outside was only a prelude. I'm so sorry, she whispered. I didn't know he was following me. I trust you, Aurnach interrupted, pulling back just enough to look at her. But his eyes had hardened. Though I thought we agreed, no more reckless stunts. She looked down, ashamed. I had to distract him. There was no other way. I know. But next time, save your seduction for me. She raised an eyebrow, feigning wounded dignity. I tried to seduce you earlier, remember? And it didn't work. No, Liobhan. I was never immune, he said, and kissed her with a tenderness that cut. He pulled away reluctantly. I have to gather the men. Farquhar won't be far. She nodded, still shaking. The entrance. Exactly. If they come, it'll be through there. He was about to dress when he heard Liobhan gasp. The sheet was soaked with blood. Your wound? It's nothing, Aurnach lied, though it burned like fire. Their eyes met. No words. Be careful, she said at last. He brushed her lips with a kiss that was both promise and farewell. I will.